Millionaire CEO fired the maid for a small mistake, but the note she left made him run to find her. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The 42nd floor of the Mitchell building hummed with the quiet efficiency of power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of downtown Chicago, where lesser mortals scurried like ants far below. The mahogany desk that dominated the corner office had cost more than most people made in a year, and Brian Mitchell preferred it that way. The Henderson account needs to be finalized by 3, Brian said into his phone, not bothering to look at the woman who had entered his office to empty the wastebasket. I don't care if they're having second thoughts. We have a contract. Dorothy Wilson moved silently across the Persian rug, her cleaning cart barely making a sound. She had perfected the art of invisibility over the past 18 months, understanding that her presence was tolerated only as long as it remained unnoticed. The $20 uniform she wore had been washed so many times that the blue fabric had faded to a tired gray, but it was clean and pressed with the care of someone who took pride in small details. No excuses, Davis. Get it done. Brian ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This is Mitchell. I need the quarterly projections on my desk in an hour. Dorothy worked methodically, emptying trash cans, dusting surfaces, careful not to disturb the perfectly arranged papers and expensive gadgets that marked the territory of the very wealthy. She had learned to read the mood of the office by the set of Brian's shoulders, the tempo of his voice, the way his fingers drummed against his desk when deals weren't closing fast enough. Today, those shoulders were particularly rigid. What do you mean the software is delayed? Brian's voice cut through the air like a blade. I specifically told the development team that we needed beta testing completed by yesterday. Dorothy glanced up from the filing cabinet she was dusting. Brian Mitchell was everything she wasn't: young, privileged, commanding. His tailored suits probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His Harvard MBA hung on the wall like a banner of superiority. His entire existence was a testament to the belief that money could buy everything that mattered. And yet, in quiet moments like these, when he thought no one was watching, Dorothy sometimes caught glimpses of something else, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of pressure beyond his years, a loneliness that expensive toys couldn't fill. But those moments were rare, quickly buried beneath the armor of corporate ruthlessness. I don't want to hear about technical difficulties, Brian continued, his voice rising. I want solutions. If your team can't deliver, I'll find a team that can. Dorothy moved to the coffee table, where she noticed a small water ring on the polished surface. It was barely visible, probably from a glass someone had placed there without a coaster. She reached for her cleaning cloth, knowing that attention to detail was what separated adequate employees from exceptional ones. As she leaned over to address the mark, her elbow caught the edge of a crystal paperweight. The expensive piece tumbled to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the office like a gunshot. The room fell silent. Brian slowly turned in his chair, his pale blue eyes fixing on Dorothy with the cold precision of a predator sizing up prey. She had frozen, the cleaning cloth still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'll call you back, Brian said into the phone, his voice deceptively calm. He placed the handset in its cradle with deliberate precision. Dorothy knelt quickly, gathering the pieces of the paperweight. Her hands shook as she tried to fit the fragments together, hoping against hope that the damage might be repairable. The crystal had shattered into 5 distinct pieces, each one catching the afternoon light like a tiny accusation. Stand up, Brian said. Dorothy rose slowly, the broken pieces cradled in her palms. Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I can replace it. I can... Do you know what that paperweight cost? She looked down at the fragments, her mind racing through calculations she couldn't afford to make. "No, sir. $800. It was a gift from the mayor when we closed the waterfront development deal." Brian stood, his 6-foot frame imposing in the afternoon light. $800. And you destroyed it with your carelessness. "I understand, sir. I'll pay for the replacement. I can make payment arrangements." "Payment arrangements?" Brian's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You make what, $12 an hour? It would take you over 60 hours of work to pay for your mistake. Do you think I have time to administrate your personal payment plan?" Dorothy's face burned with shame and something else, a growing anger that she fought to keep hidden. "No, sir. I'll find another way." "Yes, you will. You'll find another job." Brian moved to his desk, pulling out a form that he kept in his top drawer for occasions like this. "Your employment with Mitchell Building Services is terminated, effective immediately." The words hit Dorothy like a physical blow. She had expected consequences, but not this. Not the loss of everything she had worked for, everything she needed to keep her small world together. "Mr. Mitchell, please. I've been working here for 18 months. I've never been late, never missed a day. This is my first mistake, and your last." Brian filled out the termination form with practiced efficiency. "Security will escort you out. You'll receive your final paycheck within 72 hours. Dorothy stared at the form he held out to her, her mind struggling to process the sudden shift from routine workday to personal catastrophe. "My daughter," she whispered. "She's starting college in the fall. I need this job." For a moment, something flickered in Brian's expression, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold mask of corporate authority. "That's not my problem. Your personal circumstances don't excuse professional incompetence." Professional incompetence. The words escaped before Dorothy could stop them. "I knocked over a paperweight by accident. I've cleaned this office every day for 18 months. I've seen the kind of deals you make, the way you treat people. And you're calling me incompetent?" Brian's eyes narrowed. "I'm calling you unemployed. Security will be here in 5 minutes to escort you out. I suggest you use that time to collect your belongings." Dorothy stood there for a long moment, the termination form crumpled in her hand along with the broken crystal. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the door, her spine straight despite the weight of defeat pressing down on her shoulders. As she reached the threshold, she paused. "You know what, Mr. Mitchell? I feel sorry for you." "Excuse me?" "I said I feel sorry for you. I'm losing a job. But you're losing something much more valuable." "And what's that?" Dorothy turned back to face him, and for the first time in 18 months, she looked directly into his eyes. "Your humanity." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Brian alone with the afternoon light and the sudden, inexplicable feeling that something important had just walked out of his life. The employee break room in the basement of the Mitchell building was a study in corporate afterthought. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the mismatched furniture and vending machines that had seen better decades. Dorothy sat at a small plastic table, her few personal belongings spread before her like the remnants of a life that had just imploded. A coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" printed in fading letters. A small photo of her daughter Emma in her graduation cap and gown. A romance novel with a cracked spine that she read during lunch breaks. These were the sum total of her presence in this building, easily contained in a cardboard box that had once held copy paper. "I heard what happened," said Maria Gonzalez, sliding into the chair across from Dorothy. Maria worked the night shift, cleaning offices on floors 30 through 35. They had shared brief conversations over the past year, the kind of solidarity that forms between people who understand what it means to be invisible. "News travels fast," Dorothy replied, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Faster when it's bad news. I'm sorry, Dorothy. Mitchell's an ice-cold bastard, but I thought you were safe. You were always so careful." Dorothy touched the photo of Emma, her fingers tracing the edges of her daughter's smile. "Under careful doesn't matter when you're dealing with someone who thinks you're disposable. What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dorothy had been asking herself the same thing for the past 2 hours, and the answers all led to the same dark place. Emma's college fund was nearly depleted. The part-time job at the diner barely covered groceries. Without this income, she'd be facing eviction within 2 months. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'll figure something out. I always do." Maria reached across the table and squeezed Dorothy's hand. "You're stronger than you know, and maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Maybe something better is coming." Dorothy wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe in the kind of fairy tale logic that said good things happen to good people, that hard work and kindness were rewarded, that the universe had a sense of justice. But 36 years of experience had taught her that the universe was largely indifferent to human suffering. "Maybe," she said anyway, because hope was sometimes the only thing that kept you moving forward. After Maria left, Dorothy remained at the table, staring at the blank piece of paper she had pulled from her purse. She had been thinking about this for the past hour, wrestling with the impulse to put her thoughts into words. It was probably a mistake. It would certainly change nothing, but sometimes the need to speak truth was stronger than the need to be smart. She uncapped her pen and began to write, "Mr. Mitchell, I don't expect you to read this, and I don't expect it to change anything. But I need to say it anyway. I worked in your office for 18 months. I saw you make deals that put people out of work. I saw you fire employees for asking questions about their benefits. I saw you treat human beings like numbers on a spreadsheet, and I said nothing because I needed the job. But today, when you fired me for an accident, you called me incompetent. You said my personal circumstances weren't your problem, and I realized that you've never seen me as a person at all. I'm a mother. I'm a high school graduate who read every book in the public library before I turned 16. I'm someone who's been working since I was 14 years old, who's never taken a handout or asked for charity. I'm someone who knows the difference between right and wrong, even when wrong is more profitable. You have everything that money can buy, but you don't have the one thing that money can't buy, the ability to see other people as human beings who matter. I feel sorry for you, Mr. Mitchell, not because you're cruel, but because you're empty. And someday, when you're sitting alone in your expensive office, surrounded by all your expensive things, you're going to realize that you've spent your whole life pushing away the only things that could have made you happy. I hope you find your way back to whatever made you human. I really do. Dorothy Wilson. She folded the letter and wrote, "Mr. Mitchell," on the outside, then walked to the elevator that would take her to the 42nd floor one last time. The security guard was waiting when she arrived, a young man named Dave, who had always been polite during her 18 months of service. "I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Wilson," he said quietly as he escorted her toward the exit. "This isn't right." "It's okay, Dave. It's not your fault." As they passed Brian's office, Dorothy could see him through the glass wall, talking on the phone, already absorbed in the next crisis, the next deal, the next opportunity to prove his worth through the accumulation of power. She slipped the folded letter under his door, a small act of defiance that felt both futile and necessary. The walk to the elevators seemed to take forever. Other employees watched from their cubicles, some with sympathy, others with the relief of people who had been spared. Dorothy kept her head high, her shoulders straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, and Dorothy descended toward the ground floor, toward her car, toward the uncertain future that awaited her beyond the walls of the Mitchell building. She didn't look back. Brian Mitchell had built his reputation on the ability to compartmentalize. Personal feelings were a luxury he couldn't afford in the corporate world, where hesitation could cost millions and sentiment was a sign of weakness. By the time Dorothy Wilson had been escorted from the building, he had already moved on to the next crisis, the next negotiation, the next opportunity to prove that he was worthy of the power he wielded. The afternoon blurred past in a series of phone calls and meetings. The Henderson account was finally resolved, with Brian personally calling the client to smooth over what his subordinates had bungled. The software development team was given an ultimatum that would either motivate them to excellence or provide grounds for their dismissal. A new acquisition opportunity in Detroit required immediate attention, with contracts to be reviewed and legal strategies to be developed. It was after 6 o'clock when Brian finally allowed himself to lean back in his leather chair and survey his domain. The office cleaning crew had already been through. Dorothy's replacement, he assumed, and the space was restored to its usual pristine state. Even the broken paperweight had been disposed of, leaving no trace of the incident that had cost a woman her livelihood. He was reaching for his jacket when he noticed the folded piece of paper on the floor near his door. Someone must have slipped it under while he was on the phone. Brian picked it up, expecting to find a memo from building management or perhaps a note from his assistant about tomorrow's schedule. Instead, he found his name written in careful script across the front. Brian unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words with the same efficient attention he brought to contracts and financial reports. But as he read, something shifted in his chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with the stress of high-stakes negotiations. "I'm a mother. I'm a high school graduate who read every book in the public library before I turned 16. He had never thought about Dorothy's life outside these walls. She had been a function, not a person, someone who emptied trash cans and dusted furniture and existed at the periphery of his awareness. The idea that she had hopes and dreams and a history that extended beyond her role as a cleaning lady had never occurred to him. "I'm someone who's been working since I was 14 years old, who's never taken a handout or asked for charity." Brian found himself reading the words twice, then 3 times, as if repetition might help him understand why they affected him so deeply. He thought about his own childhood, the private schools and summer camps, the college fund that had been established before his first birthday. He had never known what it meant to need a job, to depend on a paycheck for survival. You have everything that money can buy, but you don't have the one thing that money can't buy, the ability to see other people as human beings who matter. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Brian set the letter down on his desk, his hands trembling slightly. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that twinkled below like stars. From this height, the people on the streets were invisible, reduced to moving shadows that meant nothing to him, but Dorothy Wilson wasn't invisible, not anymore. And someday, when you're sitting alone in your expensive office, surrounded by all your expensive things, you're going to realize that you've spent your whole life pushing away the only things that could have made you happy. Brian looked around his office, at the awards on the wall, the expensive furniture, the view that proclaimed his success to anyone who entered. He had everything he had ever wanted, everything he had worked for since graduating from Harvard Business School 3 years ago. So why did he suddenly feel so empty? He picked up the letter again, his eyes lingering on the closing words. "I hope you find your way back to whatever made you human. I really do." The kindness in those words was almost harder to bear than the accusations that preceded them. After everything he had done to her, Dorothy Wilson still hoped for his redemption. She still believed there was something in him worth saving. Brian folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. He gathered his things and headed for the elevator, But instead of going down to the parking garage, he pressed the button for the basement level where the employee break room was located. The room was empty now, the night shift having begun their rounds. Brian stood in the doorway, trying to imagine Dorothy sitting here, eating her lunch, reading her romance novel, thinking about her daughter's future. This was her world, the part of the building he had never bothered to see. On the bulletin board, among the employee notices and safety reminders, he found a group photo from last year's holiday party. Dorothy was there, standing at the edge of the group, her smile genuine but subdued. She looked younger in the photo, less worn down by the weight of constant worry. Brian studied her face, trying to reconcile this image with the woman who had cleaned his office every day for 18 months. She had been there all along, present in his space, privy to his phone calls and his moods and his daily routines. But he had never really seen her. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had never expected to call. Human Resources, this is Janet. Janet, this is Brian Mitchell. I need you to pull the employment file for Dorothy Wilson. She was terminated today. Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Is there a problem with the termination? Brian paused, staring at the photo on the bulletin board. Maybe I need her home address. I can have that for you first thing tomorrow morning. I need it tonight. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. I'll have to access the system from home. It might take an hour or two. That's fine. Send it to my personal email as soon as you have it. Brian ended the call and took one last look around the break room. Tomorrow, he would do something he had never done before. He would admit he was wrong. The address Janet had provided led Brian to a neighborhood he had never seen before, despite living in Chicago his entire life. The houses were small and close together, most of them built in the 1940s and showing their age. The streetlights were dim, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks where weeds pushed through concrete like stubborn hope. Brian parked his BMW across the street from 1247 Maple Avenue and studied the small bungalow that Dorothy Wilson called home. The house was painted a cheerful yellow that looked fresh, despite the modest surroundings. The front yard was small but meticulously maintained, with flower beds that spoke of careful attention and limited resources. A ceramic garden gnome sat beneath a rose bush, its bright red hat the kind of whimsical touch that revealed something about the person who had placed it there. It was 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, and lights glowed warmly through the front windows. Brian could see the flickering blue glow of a television and the shadow of someone moving through the living room. His chest tightened as he realized what he was about to do. He had never apologized to an employee before. He had never admitted fault in a business decision, but Dorothy Wilson's letter had shifted something fundamental in his worldview. And he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the most important conversation he would ever have. Brian crossed the street and walked up the front steps, noticing the care that had been taken to make the small space welcoming. The porch was swept clean, and a small bench held a few potted plants that had been recently watered. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he going to say? That he was sorry, that he had made a mistake, that he wanted to offer her job back. All of those things were true, but they seemed inadequate in the face of what he had learned about himself in the past few hours. Before he could lose his nerve, Brian knocked on the door. The porch light came on, and he heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and Dorothy Wilson stood there in the threshold, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock to something that looked like fear. Mr. Mitchell. Her voice was steady, but Brian could see the tension in her shoulders. What are you doing here? I got your letter. Dorothy's hand tightened on the door frame. I see. I need to talk to you. Please. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he posed a threat to her safety. Brian realized how his presence must appear to her. The powerful man who had destroyed her livelihood, now showing up at her home in the darkness. The thought made him sick with shame. "Dorothy, I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to apologize." The word seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. She glanced over her shoulder into the house, then back at him. "This isn't a good time. My daughter is home, and I don't want her to see—" "Mom, who is it?" A young woman's voice called from inside the house. "It's nobody, honey. Just someone from work." Brian felt another stab of shame. He wasn't even worthy of an introduction to Dorothy's daughter, the girl whose college fund had been mentioned in her desperate plea to keep her job. "And I won't take long," Brian said. 5 minutes, please." Dorothy looked at him for another moment, then stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind her. 5 minutes. Brian had rehearsed this conversation during the drive over, but now, faced with the woman whose life he had casually destroyed, words seemed inadequate. He looked at her in the porch light, really looked at her, and saw things he had never noticed before. The lines of worry around her eyes, the way she held herself as if braced for the next blow, the dignity that remained intact despite everything he had done to her. "I read your letter," he began, "every word of it. And you were right about everything." The admission came out rougher than he intended. "I fired you because I was angry, because I needed someone to blame for my own frustration. Not because you were incompetent, but because it was easier than dealing with my own problems." Dorothy crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that made Brian realize how vulnerable she must feel. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I've been thinking about what you said, about not seeing people as human beings. You're right. I didn't." He paused, struggling to find the words. "I want to offer you your job back. My job back." Dorothy's voice was flat, unreadable. "With a raise, 20%, and I'll pay to replace the paperweight myself." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on something beyond his shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. No. I don't want my job back, Mr. Mitchell. I don't want to work for someone who thinks an apology can undo humiliation. I don't want to be grateful for the opportunity to clean up after someone who sees me as disposable." Brian felt as if she had slapped him. "Dorothy, I'm trying to make this right." "Are you? Or are you trying to make yourself feel better?" She turned to face him fully, and Brian saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Just do you know what it was like, walking out of that building today, having security escort me like I was a criminal, knowing that everyone was watching, that they were all thinking, 'There goes another one who couldn't cut it. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I have to go to 3 job interviews tomorrow. I have to explain to my daughter why I can't help her with her textbook money. I have to figure out how to pay rent on half the income I had yesterday.' And you think you can fix all of that by saying you're sorry?" Brian felt the weight of her words settling in his chest like stones. "What can I do? Tell me what I can do to make this right." Dorothy studied his face for a long moment. "You can learn from it. You can remember that the next time you're about to destroy someone's life over a paperweight, there's a real person on the other side of your decision. Someone with a family and bills and dreams that matter just as much as yours do. I will. I promise you, I will. I hope so." Dorothy's voice softened slightly. "I meant what I said in the letter. I hope you find your way back to whatever made you human, but I can't be part of that journey. I can't work for you again." Brian nodded slowly, understanding that some damage couldn't be undone with good intentions. "Is there anything else I can do? Anything at all?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. "There is one thing. Name it. The other employees, the ones who are still working for you. Treat them better. See them as people, not just functions. Remember that they have families and fears and hopes, just like you do. I will. And Mr. Mitchell, Dorothy opened the door, pausing on the threshold. Thank you for coming here. It took courage to admit you were wrong. That's more than most people in your position would do. The door closed softly, leaving Brian alone on the porch with the weight of his own actions and the echo of Dorothy's words. He walked slowly back to his car, knowing that this conversation had changed something fundamental about who he was and who he wanted to become. But he also knew that it was just the beginning. The next morning, Brian Mitchell arrived at his office earlier than usual, but not to prepare for the day's meetings or review the quarterly reports that demanded his attention. Instead, he sat at his desk with Dorothy's letter spread before him, reading it again in the harsh light of morning. You don't have the one thing that money can't buy, the ability to see other people as human beings who matter. The accusation stung even more now, after seeing Dorothy's home, after witnessing the quiet dignity with which she had refused his attempts at redemption. Brian had spent his entire adult life believing that success was measured in profit margins and market share, that leadership meant making hard decisions without emotional interference. But Dorothy's words had exposed the hollowness at the center of his philosophy. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Do come in," he called, hastily folding the letter and putting it away. "Mr. Mitchell?" His assistant, Jennifer, peered around the door. "The development team is here for the 9 o'clock meeting." Brian looked at his watch. It was 8:55, and he hadn't prepared for the meeting at all. Normally, he would have reviewed the project timeline, prepared his list of criticisms, and armed himself with the kind of sharp questions that kept his employees on edge. Today, he felt unprepared for anything. "Send them in," he said. The development team filed into his office, 5 people ranging in age from their mid-20s to early 40s, all carrying the slightly defensive posture of employees who had been summoned to account for their failures. Brian recognized the look. He had cultivated it deliberately over the years, believing that fear motivated better performance than encouragement. "Good morning," Brian said, his voice softer than usual. "Please have a seat." The team exchanged glances as they settled into the chairs arranged in front of his desk. Mark Davidson, the team leader, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Mitchell, about the software delays." "Actually, Mark, before we discuss the technical issues, I'd like to know something else." Brian leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "How are you doing? I mean, personally. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you spending time with your family?" The question caught Mark off guard. What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. You've been working 16-hour days for the past month. When's the last time you had dinner with your wife?" Mark's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like suspicion. "Or is this some kind of test?" Brian realized how foreign his concern must sound to people who had never experienced it from him before. "It's not a test. It's a question. When's the last time you had a real conversation with your wife?" I don't know. A few weeks ago, maybe. We've been so focused on the deadline that I imposed without consulting you about what was realistic." Brian looked around the room at the faces of his employees, really seeing them for the first time. "How many of you have missed your children's bedtime stories because of this project?" Sarah Chen, a young programmer, raised her hand tentatively. "My daughter's been asking why I'm never home anymore." "And you, David?" Brian turned to the senior developer. "How's your back holding up? I noticed you've been taking a lot of aspirin." David blinked in surprise. "You noticed that? I notice more than you think. I just haven't been paying attention to the right things." Brian stood and walked to the window, his back to the team. "The software delays, they're my fault, not yours. I set an impossible timeline because I was more concerned with impressing the board than with creating a sustainable work environment." "Mr. Mitchell," Mark said carefully, Are you feeling okay?" Brian turned back to face them, and for the first time in years, he allowed them to see something other than corporate authority in his expression. "I'm starting to feel human again, and I want to apologize to all of you. You've been working yourselves to death to meet my unrealistic expectations, and I've been treating you like machines instead of people." The room was so quiet that Brian could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. His employees stared at him as if he had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "Sarah," Brian said, "I want you to go home early today. Have dinner with your daughter. You read her a bedtime story. But the code review can wait until tomorrow. David Gunn, make an appointment with a doctor about your back. The company will cover any physical therapy you need." "I don't understand," Mark said. "What's changed? Yesterday you were ready to fire the entire team if we didn't deliver on time." Brian thought about Dorothy's letter, about the look in her eyes when she had refused his offer to reinstate her. "So yesterday, I made a mistake that cost someone their job, someone who didn't deserve it, and I realized that I've been making the same mistake for years. With all of you." He returned to his desk and sat down, looking at each member of the team in turn. "I want to change how we do business here. I want to create a workplace where people matter as much as profits, where deadlines are reasonable and mistakes are learning opportunities, not grounds for termination." "That sounds different," Sarah said cautiously. "It is different, and it's going to take time to figure out how to do it right, but I want to start by extending the software deadline by 2 weeks. I want you to work normal hours, spend time with your families, and deliver the best product you can without sacrificing your health or your relationships." The team exchanged glances again, but this time Brian saw hope mixed with the confusion. "What's the catch?" David asked. "No catch, just a request. I want you to help me learn how to be a better leader. Tell me when my expectations are unrealistic. Let me know when the work environment is affecting your personal lives. Help me build something we can all be proud of." Mark leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're really not going to fire us if we don't meet the original deadline?" "I'm not going to fire anyone for trying their best and falling short, but I might fire myself if I keep treating good people like they're disposable." For the first time since the meeting began, Brian saw his employees smile. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory. "There's something else," Brian said. "I want to institute a new policy. Anyone who's been working here for more than a year gets a 10% raise, effective immediately." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mr. Mitchell, that's incredibly generous." "It's not generous. It's overdue. You've been underpaid for your contributions, and I've been too focused on profit margins to care about your financial well-being." As the meeting concluded and his employees filed out of the office, Brian felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine satisfaction. Not the hollow triumph of closing a deal or the temporary rush of power, but the deep contentment that came from doing something that mattered. But even as he savored this small victory, Brian knew that changing his company culture would be the easy part. The harder challenge was changing himself, becoming the kind of person who could see Dorothy Wilson's humanity before it was too late. He pulled out his phone and dialed Jennifer's extension. "I need you to find out where Dorothy Wilson is interviewing for jobs today. I want to know where she's applying." "Mr. Mitchell, I'm not sure that's appropriate. I'm not going to interfere with her job search. I just want to make sure she finds something good." There was a pause. "I'll see what I can find out." Brian hung up and returned to Dorothy's letter, reading it once more. He was beginning to understand that this was about more than making amends for a single mistake. This was about becoming the kind of person who deserved Dorothy's forgiveness, and maybe, someday, her respect. Dorothy Wilson had always believed that dignity was a choice. Even when life handed you circumstances that seemed designed to strip away your self-respect, you could choose to hold your head high, to maintain your integrity, to remember that your worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions or actions. But sitting in the waiting room of Henderson and Associates, wearing her best interview suit, a navy blue ensemble she had bought at a thrift store and altered to fit perfectly, Dorothy found her dignity being tested in ways she hadn't expected. Mrs. Wilson. A young receptionist called her name from behind a glass partition. Mr. Henderson will see you now. Dorothy gathered her purse and the folder containing copies of her resume, letters of recommendation, and employment history. She had spent the morning at 2 other interviews, neither of which had gone particularly well. The first company had made it clear that they were looking for someone with more advanced training. The second had seemed promising until they discovered she had no transportation beyond the city bus system. Henderson and Associates was her last hope for the day, and possibly her best chance at finding employment that would pay enough to keep her small world intact. Right this way, the receptionist said, leading Dorothy down a hallway lined with motivational posters and corporate awards. Mr. Henderson is our facilities manager. He handles all the building services contracts. Dorothy nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. She had learned to read the signs, the way receptionists looked at her, the tone of voice used to announce her arrival, the subtle cues that indicated whether she was being taken seriously as a candidate. The receptionist knocked on a door marked Robert Henderson, Facilities Manager, and opened it without waiting for a response. Your 3 o'clock is here. Dorothy stepped into the office and found herself face to face with a man in his 50s whose appearance suggested he had been expecting someone else. Robert Henderson was tall and thin, with graying hair and the kind of pale complexion that came from spending too much time under fluorescent lights. His desk was covered with spreadsheets and vendor contracts, and his expression was one of polite impatience. Mrs. Wilson, he said, not bothering to stand. Please, have a seat. Dorothy settled into the chair across from his desk and placed her folder on her lap. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Henderson. I understand you're looking for cleaning staff for your downtown office complex. That's right. Night shift, 5 days a week, $8.50 an hour. Henderson glanced at his computer screen while he spoke, clearly multitasking. Sir, the position requires someone who can work independently and maintain our quality standards without supervision. I have 18 months of experience cleaning office buildings, Dorothy said, opening her folder to retrieve her resume. I've worked independently and as part of a team, and I've never had any complaints about my work quality. Henderson accepted the resume, but barely glanced at it. I see you were employed at the Mitchell building. Why did you leave? Dorothy had prepared for this question, but it still felt like a weight in her chest. I was terminated. For what reason? I accidentally broke a piece of office equipment. It was my first and only incident in 18 months of employment. Henderson looked at her directly for the first time. What kind of equipment? A crystal paperweight. I knocked it over while cleaning and it broke. I offered to pay for replacement, but my supervisor felt that termination was the appropriate response. I see. Henderson made a note on her resume. And before the Mitchell building? I worked part-time at Romano's Diner while I was looking for full-time employment. Before that, I was caring for my elderly mother until she passed away 2 years ago. So you've been out of the workforce for an extended period. It wasn't a question, but Dorothy felt compelled to answer anyway. I was caring for my mother for 3 years while she battled cancer. Before that, I worked in retail and food service for 15 years. I've been employed continuously since I was 16, with the exception of the time I spent as a caregiver. Henderson nodded, but Dorothy could see that he had already made his decision. Mrs. Wilson, I appreciate you coming in today. We have several candidates to consider, and we'll be making our decision by the end of the week. I understand. Dorothy stood, recognizing the polite dismissal. And may I ask what qualities you're looking for in the ideal candidate? Experience, reliability, and the ability to work without causing problems. Henderson's emphasis on the last point made it clear that he viewed her termination from the Mitchell building as a red flag. We can't afford to have employees who are careless with expensive equipment. Dorothy felt a flush of anger, but she kept her voice level. I understand your concern. I can provide references from my previous employers who will attest to my reliability and attention to detail. The incident at the Mitchell building was an accident, and I take full responsibility for it. I'm sure you do. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Wilson. Dorothy left the office, knowing she wouldn't be getting a call back. She had seen the look in Henderson's eyes, the same look she had been seeing all day. She was damaged goods, a liability, someone who carried the stain of having been fired for cause. On the bus ride home, Dorothy stared out the window at the city she had lived in her entire life. Chicago had always been a place of possibilities for her, even when those possibilities were small. She had walked these streets as a young woman full of dreams, had raised her daughter in this environment, had believed that hard work and determination would eventually lead to something better. Now, at 36, with her daughter about to start college and her own prospects dimming, Dorothy wondered if she had been naive to believe in the promise of upward mobility. Maybe some people were meant to struggle, to work multiple jobs just to survive, to watch opportunities slip away because of circumstances beyond their control. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did the interviews go? Dorothy typed back, still waiting to hear back. Don't worry, honey. Something will work out. She hoped she was telling the truth. That evening, Dorothy sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop, searching online job boards for positions she might have missed. The kitchen was small but cheerful, with yellow walls and white cabinets that she had painted herself. A few photos of Emma decorated the refrigerator, along with a calendar marked with college orientation dates and scholarship deadlines. Emma emerged from her bedroom carrying a stack of textbooks. At 18, she was the physical embodiment of Dorothy's hopes and dreams, intelligent, ambitious, and determined to build a life that would give her more options than her mother had ever had. She had her mother's dark hair and quick smile, but her eyes held a confidence that Dorothy had never possessed at that age. Mom, I've been thinking about this college thing, Emma said, settling into the chair across from Dorothy. Maybe I should defer for a year, get a job, help out with expenses. Dorothy looked up from her laptop screen. Absolutely not. But if you're having trouble finding work, I'm not having trouble. I'm having a temporary setback. There's a difference. Dorothy closed the laptop and gave Emma her full attention. We've been planning for your college education since you were in middle school. I'm not going to let one bad day derail everything we've worked for. Emma reached across the table and covered Dorothy's hand with her own. You got fired because of me, didn't you? Because you were worried about my college expenses and you were distracted. You did not cost me my job. Brian Mitchell's complete lack of humanity cost me my job. Don't you dare take responsibility for his actions. But if I wasn't going to college, you wouldn't have been so stressed. Emma. Dorothy's voice was firm. Look at me. You are the best thing I have ever done with my life. Every sacrifice I've made, every difficult choice, every moment of struggle has been worth it because it led to you becoming the amazing person you are. You are not a burden. You are not a mistake. You are my greatest achievement. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I just hate seeing you go through this. You work so hard, and it's not fair. Life isn't fair, sweetheart, but it's also not permanent. This is a rough patch, not a life sentence. I will find another job. You will go to college, and we will both be stronger for having gotten through this together. Are you sure? Really sure? Dorothy smiled, and for the first time in 2 days, it felt genuine. I'm sure. I've been taking care of myself and the people I love for a long time. I'm not going to stop now. They were interrupted by a knock at the front door. Dorothy glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9 o'clock, late for unexpected visitors. Stay here, she told Emma, and went to check who was outside. Through the peephole, she saw a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed, holding a manila envelope. Dorothy opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. Mrs. Wilson, my name is Janet Stevens. I work in human resources at the Mitchell Building. I wonder if I could speak with you for a moment. Dorothy's heart rate quickened. What about? I have something for you from Mr. Mitchell. It's regarding your employment termination. Dorothy hesitated. After Brian's visit the night before, she had hoped to put the entire Mitchell Building chapter of her life behind her. I don't want my job back. It's not about reinstatement. It's about compensation. May I come in? Dorothy looked back at Emma, who was watching from the kitchen doorway. Give me a moment. She closed the door, removed the chain, and opened it again. Come in, but I can't visit for long. Janet Stevens entered the small living room, her eyes taking in the modest but well-maintained space. Thank you. I'll be brief. She handed Dorothy the manila envelope. Mr. Mitchell asked me to deliver this personally. Dorothy opened the envelope and found a check made out to her for $5,000. Attached was a note in Brian's handwriting. For the hardship I caused. This isn't about making things right. Nothing can do that. It's about taking responsibility. B.M. I can't accept this, Dorothy said, trying to hand the envelope back to Janet. I'm afraid I can't take it back. Mr. Mitchell was very specific about that. Janet's expression was kind but firm. He said you would probably refuse, and he asked me to tell you that this isn't charity. It's an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But I don't understand. Why would he? Mrs. Wilson, I've worked at the Mitchell Building for 8 years. I've seen Mr. Mitchell fire dozens of people, and I've never seen him lose a moment's sleep over it. But after he terminated you, something changed. He's been different, asking about employee welfare, questioning company policies, treating people like people. Dorothy stared at the check, her mind struggling to process this development. He came here last night to apologize. I know. He asked me to find your address. Janet paused. Mrs. Wilson, I don't know what you said to him, but whatever it was, it worked. He's turning that company upside down, implementing new policies, giving people raises. The employees are calling it a miracle. I didn't say anything special. I just told him the truth. Sometimes the truth is the most powerful thing you can give someone. Janet moved toward the door. I hope you'll consider accepting the check. You earned it, and more. After Janet left, Dorothy sat on her couch with the check in her hands, Emma beside her. $5,000 was more money than Dorothy had ever seen at one time. It was enough to cover Emma's textbooks for the entire semester. It was enough to pay rent for 3 months while she found a new job. It was enough to breathe, to plan, to hope. Mom, Emma said softly, what are you going to do? Dorothy looked at her daughter, then at the check, then at the photo of Emma's graduation on the mantelpiece. I'm going to cash it, she said, and then I'm going to figure out how to pay it forward. For the first time since she had been escorted out of the Mitchell Building, Dorothy felt like herself again. Not a victim, not a charity case, but a woman who had survived one more challenge and was ready to face whatever came next. 2 weeks after the termination that had changed everything, Brian Mitchell found himself in a place he had never expected to be, genuinely happy to go to work. The transformation of his company culture had been gradual but profound, and the results were visible in everything from employee morale to productivity metrics. The software development team had delivered their project a day ahead of the extended deadline, and the quality exceeded everyone's expectations. The customer service department had reported a significant decrease in complaints, largely due to the improved attitudes of staff who no longer felt like they were working in a hostile environment. Even the janitorial staff, Dorothy's former colleagues, had noticed the change in Brian's demeanor when he encountered them in the hallways. But despite these professional victories, Brian found himself thinking about Dorothy Wilson every day. He had heard from Janet that she had accepted the compensation check, but beyond that, he knew nothing about her life or her search for new employment. The uncertainty gnawed at him in ways he didn't fully understand. "Mr. Mitchell?" Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. "Your lunch appointment is here." Brian looked up from the quarterly reports he'd been reviewing. "What lunch appointment?" "With Dr. Sarah Martinez from the Community Development Center. You scheduled it last week." Brian remembered now. In his effort to become more socially conscious, he had reached out to several non-profit organizations to explore potential partnerships. Dr. Martinez had been recommended as someone who could help him understand how his company might contribute to the community in meaningful ways. "Send her in," Brian said, straightening his tie and trying to shift his mental focus from financial projections to social responsibility. Dr. Sarah Martinez was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than most people revealed. She wore a simple brown dress and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had dedicated her life to causes larger than herself. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for meeting with me," she said, accepting his handshake. "I have to admit, I was surprised to get your call. The Mitchell building has never been known for its community involvement." "That's something I'm hoping to change," Brian replied, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been reevaluating a lot of things lately, and I realize that my company has been operating in isolation from the community that supports it." Dr. Martinez studied his face as if trying to determine whether his intentions were genuine. "What kind of community involvement are you considering?" "I'm not sure yet. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I want to understand what the real needs are, where we might be able to make a difference. The real needs are housing, education, and employment," Dr. Martinez said without hesitation. "We have families in this city who are working 2 and 3 jobs just to pay rent. We have talented people who can't access opportunities because they lack connections or resources. We have children who are growing up in environments that limit their potential from the day they're born." Brian found himself thinking about Dorothy's small yellow house, about Emma's college dreams, about the network of privilege that had carried him through life without his ever having to acknowledge it. What would meaningful corporate involvement look like? That depends on what you're really willing to commit to. A lot of companies want to make charitable donations so they can put out press releases about their social consciousness. But real change requires sustained engagement, personal investment, and a willingness to challenge the systems that create inequality in the first place. "I'm listening." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "We run a job training program for people who are trying to transition from minimum wage service work to skilled positions. These are mostly women, many of them single mothers, who are capable of so much more than their circumstances have allowed. They need real opportunities, not just job training." "What kind of opportunities?" internships that lead to permanent employment, mentorship from successful professionals, access to networks and resources that most people take for granted. The chance to prove themselves in environments where their potential can actually be recognized. Brian felt a spark of recognition. Would you be willing to partner with my company to create something like that? What did you have in mind? I don't know yet, but I want to find out. Can you send me information about your program participants? I'd like to understand who we'd be working with. Dr. Martinez reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. And I brought some case studies with me. These are people who have gone through our training programs and are ready for the next step. Brian opened the folder and began reading. The stories were remarkable. Women who had overcome addiction, abuse, poverty, and discrimination to build better lives for themselves and their families. Women who had been written off by society but had found the strength to write their own stories. And then he saw a name that made his heart stop. Dorothy Wilson, he read aloud. Dr. Martinez looked up from her notes. Do you know Dorothy? Yes, we've met. Brian stared at the page, reading Dorothy's story as if seeing her for the first time. The details were all there. Her role as a caregiver for her mother, her daughter's academic achievements, her recent termination from a cleaning position due to what was described as employer discrimination. Dorothy is one of our most promising participants, Doctor. Martinez continued. She has strong administrative skills, excellent problem-solving abilities, and natural leadership qualities. She's been looking for office work, but hasn't been able to find anything that pays enough to support her family. Brian closed the folder, his mind racing. Dr. Martinez, I'd like to propose something. What if we created a pilot program specifically designed to give women like Dorothy real opportunities in corporate environments, not just entry-level positions, but roles that could lead to career advancement? That sounds ambitious. What would be in it for your company? Better employees, for one thing. People who've had to fight for everything they have tend to be more dedicated, more creative, more resilient than people who've had opportunities handed to them. Brian paused, thinking about the lessons Dorothy had taught him. But honestly, I think the biggest benefit would be becoming the kind of company that deserves to succeed. Dr. Martinez smiled for the first time since entering his office. I think we can work together, Mr. Mitchell. When would you like to start? Immediately. And I'd like Dorothy Wilson to be our first participant. I'll have to ask her if she's interested. She's been somewhat discouraged by the job market lately. I understand her reluctance, but please tell her that this isn't about charity or pity. It's about recognizing talent and giving it room to grow. After Dr. Martinez left, Brian sat in his office with Dorothy's case study file spread before him. Reading about her life from this perspective, as a social worker might see it, rather than as an employer who had never bothered to learn her story, Brian began to understand the full scope of what he had done when he fired her. He had taken a woman who was already fighting against enormous odds and made her fight harder. He had looked at someone who had been caring for others her entire life and decided she was disposable. He had wielded his power like a weapon against someone who had no power to defend herself. But now, perhaps, he could use that same power differently. He could create opportunities instead of destroying them. He could build people up instead of tearing them down. Brian picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Martinez's number. Dr. Martinez, it's Brian Mitchell. I've been thinking about the program we discussed, and I'd like to make you an offer. What would it take to hire Dorothy Wilson as our program coordinator? I want her to help design the opportunities we'll be offering to other women. That's an interesting proposition. But I have to ask, why Dorothy specifically? Brian looked out his office window at the city below, where thousands of people were working multiple jobs just to survive, where talent was being wasted and potential was being squandered because of systems and attitudes that people like him had created. Because she's the one who taught me that there's a difference between being successful and being human, he said. And I think she's the right person to help me learn how to be both. Dorothy stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her best blouse for the third time. The navy blue fabric was slightly faded, but it was clean and pressed, and paired with her dark grey skirt, it was the most professional outfit she owned. She had spent the morning preparing for this meeting, which Dr. Martinez had described as a unique opportunity, without providing much detail. "You look beautiful, Mom," Emma said from the doorway. "Very professional." "I look nervous," Dorothy replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I haven't been to a real job interview in years. Cleaning positions don't usually require much more than showing up and proving you can follow instructions. This is different, though. Dr. Martinez said they specifically requested you." Dorothy had been puzzling over that detail since Dr. Martinez had called. Why would anyone specifically request her? Her resume was hardly impressive by corporate standards, and her recent termination made her damaged goods in the eyes of most employers. "I just hope I don't embarrass myself," Dorothy said, gathering her purse and the folder containing her resume and references. "Mom?" Emma's voice was serious. "You could never embarrass yourself. You're the strongest, smartest person I know. Any company would be lucky to have you." Dorothy smiled at her daughter's fierce loyalty. "I love you, sweetheart. Wish me luck." "You don't need luck. You've got everything else." The address Dr. Martinez had given her was in the downtown business district, in a building that Dorothy recognized but had never entered. The lobby was all marble and glass, with abstract art on the walls and the kind of hushed atmosphere that spoke of serious money and serious business. "And I'm here to see Dr. Sarah Martinez," Dorothy told the receptionist, a young woman whose jewelry probably cost more than Dorothy's monthly rent. "Of course. She's waiting for you in conference room B. Take the elevator to the 15th floor." Dorothy rode the elevator in silence, her hands clasped tightly around her purse. The 15th floor was a maze of offices and meeting rooms, all decorated in the kind of understated elegance that reminded her of the places she had cleaned but never belonged. Conference room B was at the end of a hallway lined with framed photographs of city landmarks. Dorothy knocked and entered to find Dr. Martinez sitting at a long wooden table across from a man in a perfectly tailored suit. A man she recognized. "Dorothy," Dr. Martinez said, standing to greet her. "Thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet Brian Mitchell." Dorothy's hands went cold. Brian stood as well, his expression unreadable, his manner formal but not hostile. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "I didn't know you would be here," Dorothy said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Dr. Martinez didn't mention—" "I asked her not to," Brian said. "I was afraid you wouldn't come if you knew I was involved." Dorothy looked at Dr. Martinez, who was watching this exchange with obvious interest. "I'm sorry, but I'm confused. What exactly is this meeting about?" "Please, sit down," Dr. Martinez said. "Let me explain." Dorothy took a seat across from Brian, acutely aware of his presence and the memories it stirred. 2 weeks ago, this man had destroyed her sense of security with casual cruelty. Now he was sitting in a conference room, asking for her time as if they were equals. "Mr. Mitchell has approached our organization about creating a partnership," Dr. Martinez began. "He wants to develop a program that will provide real career opportunities for women who are transitioning from service work to professional environments." "I see," Dorothy said carefully. "And what does this have to do with me?" Brian leaned forward. We'd like you to coordinate the program, to help design it, implement it, and serve as a mentor for the women who participate." Dorothy stared at him. "You want me to work for you?" "Not for me. With me. As a program coordinator with your own office, your own budget, and the authority to make decisions about how the program operates." "I don't understand. 2 weeks ago, you fired me for breaking a paperweight. Now you want to put me in charge of a program." Brian's expression tightened. 2 weeks ago, I was a different person, someone who made decisions based on ego and power rather than wisdom and compassion. I'm trying to become someone better. By offering me a job, by offering you an opportunity to make a difference, by recognizing that you have skills and insights that could help other women avoid the kind of treatment you received from me. Dorothy looked at Dr. Martinez, searching for some sign of what she should be thinking. "Nah, what exactly would this position involve?" Dr. Martinez opened a folder and pulled out a job description. "You'd be working with women who have completed our job training programs but need additional support to transition into professional roles. You'd help them develop interview skills, navigate workplace politics, and build the confidence they need to succeed in corporate environments. The starting salary is $50,000 annually," Brian added, "with health benefits and a retirement plan. After 6 months, we'll review your performance and discuss advancement opportunities." Dorothy's mind went blank. $50,000 was more than she had ever imagined earning. It was enough to support Emma's college education without financial stress. It was enough to move to a better neighborhood, to buy a reliable car, to build the kind of life she had always dreamed of but never dared to pursue. "Why me?" she asked. "There must be people with more experience, more education." "There are people with more credentials," Brian said, "but there's no one with more credibility. You understand what it's like to be dismissed, to be treated as if your contributions don't matter. You know what it feels like to be judged by your circumstances rather than your character. And you think that qualifies me to run a program? I think it qualifies you to run this program. The women we want to help need someone who understands their struggles, someone who can speak from experience about overcoming obstacles and maintaining dignity in the face of adversity." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications of what was being offered. "This isn't about guilt, is it? This isn't your way of making amends for firing me." Brian met her eyes directly. "It's about doing the right thing. I can't undo what I did to you, but I can try to make sure it doesn't happen to other women, and I can't think of anyone better qualified to help me do that." "There's something else," Dr. Martinez added. "This isn't just a job, Dorothy. This is a chance to create something meaningful, something that could change lives. Mr. Mitchell has committed to making this program a permanent part of his company's mission." Dorothy looked around the conference room, with its expensive furniture and its view of the city where she had spent her entire life struggling to find her place. She thought about Emma, about all the women who cleaned offices at night and worried about their children's futures. She thought about the letter she had written to Brian, about the hope she had expressed that he might find his way back to his humanity. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "It's a big decision." "Of course," Brian said. "Take all the time you need. But I hope you'll say yes. I think we could do something important together." As Dorothy left the building, her mind was spinning with possibilities and fears. She had spent so many years accepting whatever opportunities came her way, grateful for any chance to support her family. Now she was being offered the opportunity to shape her own future, to build something that could make a difference in the lives of other women, but it would mean working with Brian Mitchell, trusting him, believing that his transformation was genuine and lasting. It would mean risking her heart on the possibility that people could change, that second chances could lead to something better than first chances ever had. For the first time in weeks, Dorothy felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Brian Mitchell had always been a man of decisive action. In the corporate world, hesitation was often interpreted as weakness, and successful leaders were expected to make difficult decisions quickly and confidently. But as he sat in his office the morning after his meeting with Dorothy, Brian found himself in the unfamiliar position of waiting for someone else's decision about his future. He had offered Dorothy the position of program coordinator with complete sincerity, but he had also offered it knowing that her acceptance would mean more to him than any business deal he had ever closed. Working with her would be his opportunity to prove, to himself as much as to her, that he was capable of genuine change. "Mr. Mitchell," Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. "Dr. Martinez is on line 2. Brian picked up the phone immediately. "Dr. Martinez, good morning. Do you have news?" "I do. I just spoke with Dorothy Wilson, and she's asked me to meet with her this afternoon to discuss some questions she has about the position." "Questions?" "She wants to understand the parameters of the program, the expectations for her role, and the level of autonomy she would have in developing the curriculum and selecting participants." Brian felt a surge of excitement. Dorothy wasn't saying no, she was negotiating. "Oh, what can I do to help address her concerns?" "She's asked to speak with you directly. She wants to have a conversation about your motivations and your commitment to the program's success." "When?" "This evening, if you're available." She suggested meeting at the coffee shop on Elm Street at 7 o'clock. Brian checked his calendar, which was filled with meetings and conference calls that had seemed important an hour ago. "I'll be there." After ending the call, Brian found himself staring out his office window at the city below. He had spent years viewing Chicago from this height, seeing it as his domain, his kingdom to be conquered and controlled. But Dorothy's letter had changed his perspective on everything, including the view from his office. Now he saw the city as a community of individuals, each with their own struggles and dreams, each deserving of respect and opportunity. At exactly 7 o'clock, Brian entered the coffee shop on Elm Street, a small neighborhood establishment that was worlds away from the upscale restaurants where he usually conducted business. The atmosphere was warm and informal, with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. Dorothy was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea and a small notebook. "Thank you for coming," she said as Brian approached. "I hope you don't mind meeting here. I thought it might be better to have this conversation on neutral ground." "Of course." Brian ordered a coffee and joined her at the table. "Dr. Martinez said you had some questions about the position." Dorothy nodded. "I've been thinking about your offer, and I have to be honest, I'm struggling to understand your motivations. 2 weeks ago, you treated me like I was invisible. Now you want to make me the face of your company's social responsibility program. That's a dramatic change." Brian had prepared for this question, but sitting across from Dorothy, seeing the wariness in her eyes, he realized that prepared answers weren't going to be sufficient. "You want the truth." "I want the truth. The truth is that you scared me. Your letter, your refusal to accept my apology, your dignity in the face of my cruelty. It all scared me because it forced me to see myself clearly for the first time in years." Brian paused, trying to find the right words. "I've been successful by conventional measures, but I've been failing as a human being. You showed me that, and I can't go back to pretending I don't know it." "So this is about your conscience?" "Partly. but it's also about my future. I want to build a company that I can be proud of, that reflects the values I want to live by. I can't do that alone. I need people who understand what those values actually mean in practice. Dorothy sipped her tea, studying his face. What makes you think I want to work with you? What makes you think I can trust you? Brian felt the weight of her question. I don't know if you can trust me. I hope you can. But I understand why you might not. All I can tell you is that I'm committed to proving myself worthy of your trust. And if you change your mind, if you decide that this social responsibility thing is bad for business, what happens to the women who will be depending on this program? I've set up a legal structure that protects the program's funding for 5 years, regardless of what happens to me personally. And I've given Dr. Martinez's organization oversight authority to ensure that the program maintains its integrity. Dorothy looked surprised. You've already done that. I wanted you to know that this isn't just a whim or a publicity stunt. This is a commitment I'm making to the community and to the women who need these opportunities. Dorothy opened her notebook, and Brian could see pages of handwritten questions and notes. I've been thinking about what this program could accomplish. Not just job training, but mentorship, networking, confidence building. I think we could create something that really transforms lives. Tell me more. The women who need this program aren't just lacking skills, they're lacking connections. They don't know how to navigate professional environments because they've never been part of them. They need someone to teach them the unwritten rules, to help them understand the culture, to advocate for them when they're ready for advancement. Brian leaned forward, caught up in her vision. That makes sense. What else? They need to see other women who've made the transition successfully. They need role models who understand where they're coming from and can show them where they're going. Dorothy paused. I think the program should include women who are already successful in professional roles, women who can serve as mentors and advocates. You mean like you? Dorothy smiled, and Brian realized it was the first genuine smile she had directed at him since they'd met. I'm not successful yet, but I could be, with the right opportunity. Is that a yes? Dorothy closed her notebook and looked at him directly. It's a yes, with conditions. Name them. I want complete autonomy in developing the program curriculum and selecting participants. I want the authority to advocate for the women in the program, even if that means challenging company policies or practices. And I want a commitment that this program will be evaluated based on its impact on participants' lives, not just on its public relations value. Brian extended his hand across the table. You have my word on all of that. Dorothy shook his hand, her grip firm and confident. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Mitchell. When do I start? Monday, if you're ready. And Dorothy? Yes? Thank you for giving me this chance to do something meaningful. Dorothy gathered her things and stood to leave. Don't thank me yet. Thank me in a year, when we can measure the difference we've made. As Brian watched her walk out of the coffee shop, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about going to work. Not because of a deal to be closed or a profit to be made, but because of lives to be changed and potential to be unlocked. For the first time since receiving Dorothy's letter, Brian felt like he might actually be becoming the person she had hoped he could be. Dorothy's first day as program coordinator for the Women's Professional Development Initiative began at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning in October. She stood in front of the Mitchell building, the same building where she had worked in the shadows for 18 months, but this time she was entering through the main entrance as a salaried employee with her own office and her own purpose. The security guard, Dave, recognized her immediately. Mrs. Wilson, I heard about your new position. Congratulations. Thank you, Dave. It's good to see you again. It's good to see you back where you belong. We all knew you got a raw deal before. Dorothy smiled, touched by his support. I appreciate that more than you know. The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt different this time. Instead of heading to the basement to collect her cleaning supplies, Dorothy was ascending to the executive level where her new office was located. The thought still seemed surreal. Dorothy Wilson, high school graduate and former cleaning lady, with her own office in one of Chicago's most prestigious buildings. Dorothy! Dr. Martinez was waiting for her when the elevator doors opened. How does it feel to be back? Strange, Dorothy admitted. Good strange, but still strange. Brian asked me to show you to your office and help you get settled. He's in meetings all morning, but he wants to touch base with you this afternoon. Dorothy followed Dr. Martinez down a hallway she had never seen before, past offices occupied by executives and administrators whose names she recognized from the company directory. Her office was at the end of the hall, with a nameplate on the door that read, Dorothy Wilson, Program Coordinator. This is yours, Dr. Martinez said, opening the door. The office was modest but professional, with a desk, computer, filing cabinet, and 2 chairs for visitors. A large window overlooked the city, offering a view that Dorothy had never seen from this angle. On the desk was a welcome bouquet and a note. Looking forward to working with you, B. It's perfect, Dorothy said, setting her purse down on the desk. I can't believe this is really happening. Believe it, and get ready to work. We have 5 women starting the program next week, and they're all counting on you to help them succeed. Dorothy spent the morning reviewing the files of the program participants. Each woman had a different story, but they all shared common themes: intelligence and determination constrained by circumstances, potential limited by lack of opportunity, dreams deferred by the daily struggle for survival. There was Maria Santos, a single mother of 3, who had been working as a hotel housekeeper for 10 years while completing her associate degree in business administration through night classes. There was Jennifer Chen, a former factory worker who had taught herself computer programming through online courses. There was Angela Thompson, a retail manager who had been passed over for promotion repeatedly, despite her exceptional performance and leadership skills. These were the women Dorothy would be working with, and their stories resonated with her own experiences of being underestimated and undervalued. She understood their fears and their hopes because she had lived them herself. Knock, knock. Brian's voice came from the doorway. How's your first day going? Dorothy looked up from the files spread across her desk. It's going well. I've been reviewing the participant profiles, and I'm excited to meet these women. Brian entered the office and took a seat across from her desk. I wanted to check in with you and see if you need anything to get started. Actually, I do have some questions about the program structure. I've been thinking about the best way to integrate these women into the corporate environment, and I think we need to address some systemic issues that might work against them. Such as... Dorothy opened her notebook and consulted her notes. Professional wardrobe, for one thing. These women are transitioning from service jobs where uniforms were provided to professional roles where they're expected to dress appropriately. That's a significant expense for someone who's been living paycheck to paycheck. Brian nodded. That makes sense. What do you suggest? I'd like to establish a professional clothing fund, maybe partner with local retailers to provide affordable options. I also think we should include wardrobe consulting as part of the program, teaching women how to dress professionally on a budget. Done. What else? Transportation. Most of these women don't have reliable cars, and public transportation can be a challenge when you're trying to get to early meetings or working late. I think we should provide transportation assistance for the first 6 months. That's a good point. We can set up a fund for that too. Dorothy was impressed by his immediate willingness to address these practical concerns. There's one more thing, and it's more complicated. I'm listening. Workplace culture. These women are going to be entering environments where they may be the only people of color, the only people from working class backgrounds, the only ones who understand what it's like to struggle financially. They need advocates within the company, people who will support them and help them navigate the social dynamics. Brian was quiet for a moment. Are you saying that my company has cultural problems? I'm saying that most companies have cultural problems when it comes to integrating people from different backgrounds. The question is whether you're willing to address them. What would that look like? Dorothy leaned forward. And it would mean training your existing employees about unconscious bias and inclusive workplace practices. It would mean creating mentorship programs that pair program participants with established employees. It would mean being willing to have difficult conversations about equity and opportunity. Brian studied her face. You're not just talking about helping these 5 women, are you? You're talking about changing the entire company culture. I'm talking about creating an environment where women like me can succeed, where we're not just grateful to be given a chance, but where we're truly valued for our contributions. That's ambitious. It's necessary. If you want this program to succeed, if you want to make a real difference, you have to be willing to change the systems that create inequality in the first place. Brian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You know, 3 weeks ago, I would have said that was too complicated, too risky, too expensive. But now I think you're right. And I think you're the right person to help me figure out how to do it. Dorothy felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. Are you sure you're ready for this? It's going to be challenging. There will be resistance from employees who don't understand why change is necessary. There will be mistakes and setbacks. It's not going to be easy. Brian turned back to face her. Dorothy, nothing worthwhile is ever easy. But I'd rather fail at trying to do something meaningful than succeed at perpetuating something that's fundamentally wrong. In that case, Mr. Mitchell, let's get to work. As Brian left her office, Dorothy turned to look out her window at the city below. Somewhere out there were women who were cleaning offices and waiting tables and working in factories. Women who had dreams beyond their circumstances and potential beyond their current opportunities. In 6 months, some of those women would be sitting in offices like this one, building careers and building lives that they had only imagined before. Dorothy opened her computer and began typing the outline for a program that would do more than just train women for professional roles. It would challenge systems, change cultures, and create opportunities for women who had been invisible for too long. For the first time since she was a young woman, Dorothy felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 months into the Women's Professional Development Initiative, Dorothy had established a routine that felt both familiar and revolutionary. She arrived at the office each morning at 7:30, reviewed her schedule over coffee, and then spent her days working with the 5 women who had become not just program participants, but her partners in proving that potential exists everywhere, even in places where it's never been recognized. The program had evolved beyond what anyone had initially envisioned. What had started as a simple job training initiative had become a comprehensive support system that addressed everything from professional skills to personal development to systemic barriers that prevented women from advancing in corporate environments. "Good morning, Dorothy," Maria Santos called out as she entered the conference room where the weekly group meeting was held. Maria had been the first to break through, landing a position in the marketing department where her bilingual skills and creative problem-solving abilities had quickly made her indispensable. "Morning, Maria. How did the presentation go yesterday?" "Better than I expected," The client loved the campaign concept, and my supervisor gave me credit for the ideas. 6 months ago, I was cleaning hotel rooms and wondering if I'd ever do anything meaningful with my life. Jennifer Chen entered the room, carrying a stack of reports. I heard about your presentation. That's amazing. Jennifer had been placed in the IT department, where her self-taught programming skills had impressed everyone from the system administrators to the executive team. What's amazing is that we're all still here, said Angela Thompson, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. I keep waiting for someone to tell us this was all a mistake, that we don't really belong in this world. Angela had perhaps struggled the most with what she called imposter syndrome, the feeling that she didn't deserve her position as an administrative coordinator in the Human Resources Department. Despite her obvious competence and the praise of her supervisors, she battled daily with the voice in her head that told her she wasn't good enough. That feeling never completely goes away, Dorothy said, taking her place at the head of the table. But it gets easier to ignore when you start focusing on your contributions instead of your insecurities. The other two participants, Sandra Williams and Lisa Rodriguez, arrived together. Sandra had been placed in the accounting department, while Lisa was working in customer service. Both women had overcome significant personal challenges. Sandra had been homeless for 6 months before entering the program, and Lisa was a recovering addict who had been clean for 2 years. Before we start, Dorothy said, I want to share some news. Mr. Mitchell has approved funding for expanding the program. We'll be adding 10 more participants in January. The women exchanged excited glances. Does that mean you'll be hiring more coordinators? Jennifer asked. It means I'll be looking for women who are ready to take on leadership roles in the program, women who understand the challenges because they've lived them, who can mentor newcomers because they've successfully made the transition themselves. Are you talking about promoting from within? Maria asked. I'm talking about recognizing that you 5 women have become experts in something that can't be taught in business school. How to succeed when the system isn't designed for your success. That expertise is valuable, and it should be compensated accordingly. Sandra leaned forward. Dorothy, are you saying that some of us could become coordinators? I'm saying that some of you could become coordinators, trainers, mentors, or whatever role best fits your skills and interests. This program works because it's designed and implemented by women who understand the journey. As it grows, we need to maintain that authenticity. Lisa wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm getting emotional. It's just... A year ago, I was working at a gas station, trying to convince my family that I was serious about changing my life. The idea that I could help other women do the same thing, it's overwhelming. It's not overwhelming, Dorothy said gently. It's exactly what you're meant to do. All of you have something to offer that no one else can provide, the knowledge that change is possible, that dreams can come true, that people can build new lives no matter where they started. Angela raised her hand. I have a question about the new participants. Are they all going to be placed in this building? Some of them will be, but Mr. Mitchell has been talking to other companies about adopting similar programs. He wants to create a network of businesses that are committed to providing real opportunities for women transitioning out of service work. He's really serious about this, isn't he? Jennifer said. I mean, when I first heard about the program, I thought it might be some kind of publicity stunt. Dorothy smiled. I thought the same thing, but I've watched him over the past few months, and I think his commitment is genuine. He's willing to invest money, time, and political capital in making this work. How do you know? Sandra asked. Because he's been attending bias training sessions with the rest of the management team, because he's changed company policies to make them more inclusive. Because he's been asking me for feedback about how to create advancement opportunities for women who don't have traditional qualifications. Dorothy paused, thinking about her evolving relationship with Brian. And because he's been willing to be uncomfortable, to have his assumptions challenged, to admit when he's wrong, that's not something you can fake. Speaking of Mr. Mitchell, Maria said, is it true that he's been asking employees to recommend women for the program? Where did you hear that? My supervisor mentioned it. She said he sent out a company-wide email asking people to identify women in their networks who might benefit from professional development opportunities. Dorothy hadn't heard about this, but it didn't surprise her. Brian had become increasingly proactive about finding ways to expand the program's reach and impact. And that sounds like something he would do. I have a friend who's been working at a diner for 8 years, Lisa said. She's smart, she's reliable, she's great with people, but she's never had a chance to prove herself in a professional environment. Give me her information, Dorothy said. I'll make sure she's considered for the next group. As the meeting continued, Dorothy found herself thinking about the changes she had witnessed over the past 3 months. Not just in the women sitting around this table, but in the company culture itself. Employees were more aware of their biases, more inclusive in their interactions, more willing to acknowledge that talent came in forms they hadn't previously recognized. Brian had kept his promise to change the systems that perpetuated inequality. But he had gone beyond what Dorothy had expected. He had made inclusion a business priority, not just a moral obligation. He had created incentives for managers to mentor women from non-traditional backgrounds. He had established advancement pathways that recognized different types of experience and knowledge. Most importantly, he had listened to Dorothy's feedback and implemented her suggestions, even when they challenged his assumptions or required significant changes to established practices. Dorothy, Angela said, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Mr. Mitchell hadn't fired you? If you were still cleaning his office, would any of this have happened? Dorothy considered the question. I don't know, maybe not. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create opportunities for the best things to happen. Do you think you'll ever forgive him completely? Dorothy looked around the table at the faces of women who had become her colleagues, her friends, her partners in creating something meaningful. I think I already have. Not because of what he did to me, but because of what he's done for all of us. As the meeting ended and the women returned to their respective departments, Dorothy remained in the conference room, thinking about forgiveness and redemption and the possibility that people could change in fundamental ways. Brian Mitchell had destroyed her life and then helped her build a better one. He had been the worst kind of boss and then become the best kind of partner. He had seen her as disposable and then recognized her as indispensable. The journey from termination to collaboration had been painful and uncertain, but it had led to something neither of them could have imagined, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared commitment to creating opportunities for women who had been invisible for too long. Dorothy gathered her materials and headed back to her office, ready to begin planning for the next phase of the program. She had work to do, women to mentor, and a future to build. For the first time in her adult life, Dorothy felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months after Dorothy Wilson had been escorted out of the Mitchell building as a terminated employee, she found herself sitting across from Brian Mitchell in his office as an equal partner in a program that was changing lives and challenging assumptions about talent, potential, and opportunity. The board meeting went well, Brian said, sliding a folder across his desk. They've approved funding for the next phase of expansion. Dorothy opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. The numbers were impressive. funding for 50 new program participants, partnerships with 12 other companies, and a commitment to make the Women's Professional Development Initiative a permanent part of the company's mission. "This is more than we asked for," Dorothy said, looking up from the papers. "It's less than we deserve. The board has seen the results: increased productivity, improved employee satisfaction, better customer service ratings. They're not funding this program out of charity. They're funding it because it's good business." Dorothy smiled. "I never thought I'd hear you say that helping people was good business. I never thought I'd believe it. But you've taught me that investing in people is the best investment a company can make." There was a knock on the door, and Jennifer entered with a stack of applications. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but these are the applications for the next program cycle. We received over 200 submissions. 200. Dorothy took the stack of papers, impressed by the weight of them. "That's 4 times as many as last cycle." "Word is spreading," Brian said. "Women are talking to other women, sharing their stories, recommending the program. It's becoming self-sustaining." After Jennifer left, Dorothy began flipping through the applications. Each one represented a woman who was ready to change her life, who believed that she deserved better opportunities, who was willing to work hard for the chance to prove herself. "Brian," Dorothy said, "I want to tell you something." "What's that?" "When I first started this job, I was motivated by gratitude. I was grateful for the opportunity, grateful for the chance to prove myself, grateful that you were willing to give me a second chance. And now I'm motivated by something else. I'm motivated by the knowledge that what we're doing here matters. That we're changing lives, changing systems, changing the way people think about potential and opportunity." Brian leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about that too, about how this program has changed me, changed my understanding of what leadership means." "How so?" "I used to think that leadership meant making decisions, giving orders, controlling outcomes. Now I think it means creating opportunities for other people to succeed, removing barriers that prevent them from reaching their potential." Dorothy nodded. "That's exactly what leadership should be, and you've become good at it. I've had a good teacher." They were interrupted by another knock on the door. This time it was Maria Santos, who had been promoted to Senior Marketing Coordinator the previous month. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Maria said, "but I wanted to let you both know that I just got off the phone with a reporter from the Chicago Tribune. She wants to do a feature story about the program." "What did you tell her?" Dorothy asked. "I told her that she should talk to you, both of you. This story isn't just about the women who've been helped by the program. It's about the partnership that made it possible." After Maria left, Dorothy and Brian looked at each other across the desk that had once been a symbol of the power imbalance between them. "Are you ready for that kind of attention?" Brian asked. "Are you?" "I think so. I think it's time for other companies to see what's possible when you're willing to challenge your assumptions about talent and potential." Dorothy stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "You know what I see when I look out there now?" "What?" "I see women who are working jobs that don't challenge them, who have dreams they've never been encouraged to pursue, who have potential that's never been recognized. I see the next 50 women who will go through this program, and the 50 after that, and the 50 after that." Brian joined her at the window. "I see the same thing, and I see the companies that will partner with us, the other programs that will be created, the systemic changes that will happen, because we proved that this approach works." "Do you think we'll still be working together in 5 years?" Brian was quiet for a moment. "I hope so. I can't imagine doing this work with anyone else." Dorothy felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with professional success, and everything to do with the unexpected friendship that had grown out of their shared commitment to making a difference. "There's something I need to tell you," Dorothy said, "something I've been thinking about for months." "What is it?" "I forgive you. Completely. For firing me, for the way you treated me, for all of it. I forgive you because you've shown me that people can change, that redemption is possible, that the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best opportunities." Brian's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know. And I need to thank you too, for listening to my letter, for being willing to change, for giving me the chance to do work that matters. And for seeing me as more than just a cleaning lady." "You were never just a cleaning lady, Dorothy. You were always remarkable. I just wasn't wise enough to see it." They stood together at the window, looking out at the city that had brought them together, that had tested them, that had given them the opportunity to build something meaningful. "So what's next?" Dorothy asked. "Next, we change the world. One woman at a time, one company at a time, one opportunity at a time. That's a big goal. We've already proven that big goals are achievable. Look what we've accomplished in 6 months." Dorothy thought about the women who were now thriving in professional roles, about the companies that were changing their hiring practices, about the systems that were slowly being transformed. "You're right," she said. "We have accomplished something remarkable. We've accomplished something remarkable together, and I think we're just getting started." As the afternoon light faded over Chicago, Dorothy and Brian continued to plan and dream and work toward a future where talent would be recognized wherever it existed, where potential would be nurtured regardless of background, where women like Dorothy Wilson would never again be treated as disposable. The program that had started as Brian's attempt at redemption had become something much larger, a movement, a model, a proof of concept that the world could be more equitable if people were willing to do the work of making it so. And at the center of it all was a partnership between two people who had found their way to each other through the most unlikely circumstances, who had discovered that forgiveness could lead to friendship, and that the courage to change could create opportunities neither of them had ever imagined. 1 year after Dorothy Wilson had been fired for breaking a crystal paperweight, she stood in the ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel, watching 500 people celebrate the first anniversary of the Women's Professional Development Initiative. The event was a fundraiser for the program's expansion, but it was also a celebration of the women whose lives had been transformed and the companies that had committed to creating more inclusive workplaces. "I can't believe how many people are here," Emma said, standing beside her mother in a dress they had bought together for the occasion. Emma was now in her 2nd semester of college, studying business administration with a minor in social work, inspired by her mother's journey from cleaning lady to program director. "I can't believe how many of them are here because of you," added Maria Santos, who had been promoted again and was now heading up the marketing department's diversity and inclusion initiatives. Dorothy looked around the ballroom at the faces of women who had become her colleagues, her friends, her partners, in proving that potential existed in unexpected places. The original 5 program participants were all there, each having advanced in their careers and taken on mentorship roles for newer participants. Representatives from the 12 partner companies were mingling with program participants, sharing stories and planning future collaborations. At the center of it all was Brian Mitchell, no longer the cold, ruthless executive who had once treated employees as disposable, but a leader who had learned that the best way to succeed was to help others succeed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brian said, taking the microphone at the front of the room, "thank you all for being here tonight. A year ago, I made a decision that I thought was about business efficiency, but which was actually about my own blindness to the humanity of the people around me." The room fell silent as Brian continued. I fired a woman named Dorothy Wilson for breaking a paperweight. I treated her like she was disposable, like her contributions didn't matter, like her circumstances were irrelevant to my business decisions. It was one of the worst things I've ever done, and it was also the beginning of the best thing I've ever done. Dorothy felt her eyes fill with tears as Brian looked directly at her. Dorothy Wilson taught me that the most valuable resources in any organization are the people who work there. She taught me that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. She taught me that my job as a leader isn't to judge people based on their circumstances, but to create circumstances where people can thrive. The applause was warm and sustained. Dorothy looked around the room at faces that had become familiar, women who had been given chances they had never expected, men who had learned to recognize talent in forms they had never considered, business leaders who had discovered that inclusion was not just morally right, but economically smart. The Women's Professional Development Initiative has placed 127 women in professional roles over the past year, Brian continued. But more importantly, it has changed the way we think about potential, about talent, about the kind of workplace we want to create. More applause. Dorothy saw Sandra Williams, who had been promoted to assistant manager in the accounting department. She saw Lisa Rodriguez, who had started her own consulting firm, helping other companies develop inclusion programs. She saw Jennifer Chen, who had been accepted into a master's program in computer science with full funding from the company's education partnership. But tonight isn't about me, Brian said. Tonight is about Dorothy Wilson, who turned a devastating personal setback into an opportunity to help other women avoid the same kind of treatment she received. Dorothy, would you join me up here? Dorothy walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding. Public speaking had never been her strength, but over the past year, she had learned that sometimes the most important messages came from the most unlikely messengers. "Thank you," she said, accepting the microphone from Brian. "A year ago, I was a cleaning lady who made a mistake and lost her job. I was angry, I was scared, and I was convinced that people like me didn't matter to people like him." She gestured toward Brian, who was standing beside her with an expression of profound respect and gratitude. "I wrote a letter," Dorothy continued. "I told him that he had everything money could buy, but he didn't have the ability to see other people as human beings. I told him that someday he would realize he had spent his life pushing away the only things that could have made him happy." The room was completely quiet. "I was wrong about one thing," Dorothy said. "I thought that someone who had been cruel could never learn to be kind. I thought that someone who had been blind could never learn to see. I thought that someone who had been powerful could never learn to be human." She looked at Brian, then at the faces in the audience. "But Brian Mitchell proved me wrong. He didn't just offer me a job, he offered me a partnership. He didn't just apologize for his mistake, he committed to making sure other women wouldn't experience the same treatment. He didn't just change his behavior, he changed his heart." The applause was thunderous. Dorothy waited for it to subside before continuing. "This program works because it's based on a simple truth. Everyone has something to contribute, but not everyone has the opportunity to contribute it. Our job is to create those opportunities, to remove the barriers that prevent people from reaching their potential, to build bridges between where people are and where they want to be." She paused, looking at Emma, who was beaming with pride. "My daughter is in college now, studying to become a social worker. She wants to help people build better lives, just like this program has helped me build mine. She's going to graduate debt-free because of the salary I earn doing work that matters. But more importantly, she's going to graduate knowing that her mother refused to let one man's cruelty define her future." More applause. Dorothy felt a surge of confidence, the kind that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. To the women who are just beginning this journey, you are not charity cases. You are not projects. You are not lucky to be here. You are talented, capable, deserving individuals who have been given the opportunity to show the world what you can do. Take that opportunity and run with it. Prove that potential exists everywhere, but it just needs to be recognized and supported. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. When it finally ended, Dorothy handed the microphone back to Brian and returned to her seat beside Emma. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," Emma whispered. "You've become exactly who you were always meant to be." As the evening continued with dinner and dancing and conversations about the future, Dorothy found herself thinking about the letter she had written to Brian a year ago. She had expressed the hope that he would find his way back to whatever made him human. She had meant it as a kind of benediction, a final gift to someone who had hurt her, but whom she still believed could be better. She had never imagined that her letter would lead to this, to a partnership that had changed both of their lives, to a program that was changing the lives of hundreds of women, to a friendship that had grown out of the most unlikely circumstances. "Dorothy," Brian said, appearing beside her table as the evening wound down, "I have something for you." He handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a crystal paperweight, identical to the one she had broken in his office a year ago. "I don't understand," Dorothy said. "I want you to have it. Not as a reminder of what happened, but as a reminder of what's possible when people are willing to change, to forgive, to build something better together." Dorothy held the paperweight up to the light, watching it cast small rainbows across the white tablecloth. "It's beautiful, but I'm not sure I should keep it." "Why not?" "Because I might break it," Dorothy said with a smile. And I don't want to get fired again." Brian laughed, and Dorothy realized it was the first time she had heard him laugh with genuine joy. "I don't think you have to worry about that anymore." "No," Dorothy said, carefully placing the paperweight in her purse. "I don't think I do." As the evening ended and the guests began to leave, Dorothy stood in the hotel lobby saying goodbye to the women who had become her partners in proving that dreams could come true, that people could change, that the worst moments in life could lead to the best opportunities. She thought about the letter she had written to Brian, about the hope she had expressed that he would find his way back to his humanity. She had written those words, believing that she would never see him again, that her letter would be one woman's final attempt to reach someone who had forgotten how to see other people as worthy of respect and kindness. Instead, that letter had become the foundation of a partnership that had transformed both of their lives and the lives of hundreds of other women. It had become proof that forgiveness could lead to friendship, that redemption was possible, that people could change in fundamental ways if they were willing to do the work. "Ready to go home?" Emma asked, linking her arm through Dorothy's. "Yes," Dorothy said, looking back at the ballroom where the celebration was winding down. "I'm ready." But as they walked out into the Chicago night, Dorothy knew that this wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning, the start of the next chapter in a story that would continue to unfold as long as there were women who needed opportunities and people who were willing to create them. The program would continue to grow, the partnerships would continue to expand, and the lives would continue to be transformed. And at the center of it all would be the friendship between a woman who had refused to let cruelty define her future, and a man who had learned that the greatest success came from helping others succeed. It was a story that had begun with a broken paperweight and a pink slip, but it was becoming a love story, not just between Brian and Dorothy, but between two people who had discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to see others as fully human and worthy of every opportunity to thrive. 2 months after the anniversary celebration, Dorothy arrived at her office to find an envelope on her desk marked Urgent Legal Department. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, remembering the last time official documents had appeared unexpectedly in her life. Inside was a letter from the law firm representing Henderson and Associates, one of the companies that had initially rejected Dorothy for employment and had since become one of their harshest critics of the Women's Professional Development Initiative. Dear Ms. Wilson, our client has retained our services to investigate allegations of discriminatory hiring practices and fraudulent representation of employee qualifications in connection with the Women's Professional Development Initiative. We are prepared to file formal complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Better Business Bureau unless this matter is resolved immediately. We demand that Mitchell Enterprises cease all operations related to this program and provide full disclosure of all participant backgrounds and qualifications to their current employers. You have 72 hours to respond to this demand. Dorothy read the letter twice, her heart sinking with each word. She had known that the program's success would eventually attract negative attention from those who felt threatened by change, but she hadn't expected a direct legal challenge. Dorothy? Brian's voice came from her doorway. I got a call from our legal department. Have you seen? I've seen it. Dorothy held up the letter. What does this mean for the program? Brian entered her office and closed the door behind him. His expression was grim. It means we're about to face our biggest test yet. Henderson's been lobbying other companies to withdraw from the partnership. They're claiming that we're engaging in reverse discrimination by giving opportunities to women without traditional qualifications. But that's exactly the point of the program. We're creating opportunities for women who've been overlooked by traditional hiring practices. I know that. You know that. But they're arguing that we're being unfair to other applicants, that we're lowering standards to meet quotas. Dorothy felt a familiar surge of anger, the same emotion that had driven her to write the letter that started this entire journey. They're attacking us because we're succeeding, because we're proving that their assumptions about talent and qualifications are wrong. That's exactly what they're doing. But we have to take this seriously, Dorothy. If they file formal complaints, it could trigger investigations that might shut down the program while we fight the charges. Dorothy stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city where hundreds of women were working in professional roles they had never imagined possible. What are our options? We can fight it. We have documentation showing that every program participant has met or exceeded performance expectations in their positions. We have testimonials from supervisors, productivity data, customer satisfaction ratings. We can prove that the program works, but legal battles are expensive and time-consuming, and even if we win, the negative publicity could damage our relationships with partner companies. Some of them are already nervous about the controversy. Dorothy turned back to face him. Are you having second thoughts about the program? No, absolutely not. But I'm concerned about what this could mean for you, for the women in the program, for everything we've built. Before Dorothy could respond, there was a knock on her door. Jennifer Chen entered, followed by Maria Santos and Angela Thompson. All three women looked worried. We heard about the legal threat, Maria said. The rumor mill is working overtime, and people are scared. What kind of rumors? Dorothy asked. And that the program is going to be shut down, Jennifer replied. That the women who were hired through the initiative might lose their jobs. That there's going to be an investigation into whether we're really qualified for our positions. Angela's voice was tight with emotion. I've worked so hard to prove myself, to show that I belong here. The thought that someone might question my qualifications might suggest that I only got my job because of some kind of quota system. It's devastating. Dorothy felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These women had trusted her, had believed in the program she had helped create. Now, their careers and their futures were being threatened by people who couldn't accept that talent existed in forms they hadn't previously recognized. "Mark, we're going to fight this," Dorothy said firmly. "All of us together. We're going to prove that this program is based on merit, not charity, that the women who've been hired through this initiative earned their positions and deserve to keep them." "How?" Maria asked. "By doing what we've always done. By working harder than anyone expects, by exceeding every standard, by proving that we belong here, not because someone gave us a chance, but because we seized that chance and made the most of it." Brian nodded. "Dorothy's right. We're going to document everything, every achievement, every positive performance review, every contribution these women have made to their respective departments. We're going to build a case that's so strong, so comprehensive, that no one will be able to question the value of this program." "What about the legal costs?" Jennifer asked. "Fighting this kind of challenge could be expensive." "That's my responsibility," Brian said. "I created this program, I believe in it, and I'm going to defend it with everything I have." After the women left, Dorothy and Brian sat in her office planning their response to the legal challenge. But beneath the strategy discussions and practical considerations, Dorothy sensed a deeper worry in Brian's demeanor. "There's something else, isn't there?" she asked. Brian was quiet for a moment. "The board is nervous. Some of the members are questioning whether the program is worth the controversy it's generating. And they're asking me to consider scaling it back. Maybe limiting it to a smaller number of participants, avoiding the kind of high-profile partnerships that attract attention from critics." Dorothy felt a chill run through her. "Are you considering it?" "I'm considering everything. I have to. This company employs thousands of people, and I can't let my commitment to this program jeopardize their livelihoods." "So you're willing to sacrifice the program to protect the company?" Brian met her eyes. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect both. But I need you to help me figure out how." Dorothy looked at the legal letter still lying on her desk, then at the photos on her wall showing program participants at their graduation ceremonies, at their workplace achievements, at the anniversary celebration where they had celebrated a year of changing lives. "I need some time to think," she said. "Of course. But Dorothy, whatever we decide together. This program belongs to both of us now." That evening, Dorothy sat at her kitchen table with Emma, discussing the legal challenge and its potential implications. Emma was home for spring break, and her presence was a reminder of everything Dorothy had fought to achieve and protect. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to fight this with everything I have, to refuse to back down in the face of people who want to maintain the status quo. But another part of me wonders if I'm being selfish, if I'm putting my own pride ahead of the women who could be hurt if this battle destroys the program." "Mom, you've never been selfish. Everything you've done has been about helping other people. But what if fighting this legal challenge ends up hurting the very women I'm trying to help? What if the controversy scares away partner companies and limits future opportunities?" Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "What would you tell one of the women in your program if she was facing this kind of challenge?" Dorothy considered the question. "I'd tell her to stand up for herself, to refuse to let other people define her worth, to fight for what she believes in." "Then maybe you should take your own advice." Dorothy smiled at her daughter's wisdom. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned from the best teacher I've ever had." The next morning, Dorothy arrived at the office with a plan. She found Brian in his office, reviewing legal documents with the company's attorneys. "No, I've made a decision," she announced. Brian looked up from the papers spread across his desk. "What kind of decision?" "I'm not going to let Henderson and Associates intimidate us into abandoning this program. We're going to fight this challenge, and we're going to win." "Dorothy, the risks." "I understand the risks, but I also understand what's at stake. If we back down now, if we let fear dictate our choices, we're sending a message that programs like this aren't worth defending. We're telling the women who've worked so hard to build new lives that their achievements don't matter." Brian studied her face. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we go public with our story. Not just the legal challenge, but the whole story. How the program started, what it's accomplished, what it means for the women who've participated. Let the public decide whether what we're doing is valuable." "That's a risky strategy. Once we go public, we lose control of the narrative. We've already lost control of the narrative. Henderson's people are going to tell their version of the story whether we respond or not. At least this way, we get to tell the truth." Brian was quiet for a long moment. "If we do this, there's no going back. We'll be committing ourselves to a very public battle. I'm ready for that battle. The question is whether you are." Brian looked at the legal documents, then at Dorothy, then at the photo on his desk from the anniversary celebration. "I'm ready. But I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm grateful for what you've taught me, for the person you've helped me become. Don't talk like this is the end of something. This is just the beginning of the next chapter." "You're right." Brian stood and extended his hand. "Partners. Partners," Dorothy agreed, shaking his hand firmly. The press conference was scheduled for the following Friday in the main conference room of the Mitchell building. Dorothy had spent the week preparing her remarks, reviewing the program's achievements, and steeling herself for the kind of public scrutiny she had never experienced before. Media representatives filled the room, reporters from the major Chicago newspapers, business journalists, bloggers who covered employment and social justice issues. In the back of the room, Dorothy could see several of the program participants who had come to show their support. "Thank you all for coming," Brian began. 2 years ago, I made a decision that I thought was about business efficiency, but which was actually about my own inability to see the humanity and potential of the people around me. Today, I want to talk about what I learned from that mistake and why the program that grew out of it is worth defending." He spoke for 10 minutes about the program's origins, its achievements, and its importance to the company's culture and success. Then he introduced Dorothy, the person who really built this program, who understood its potential before I did, who has dedicated herself to proving that talent exists everywhere but opportunity doesn't, is Dorothy Wilson. "Dorothy, the floor is yours." Dorothy approached the podium with the confidence that came from knowing she was fighting for something that mattered. She looked out at the crowd of reporters and cameras, and beyond them to the faces of the women whose lives had been changed by the program she had helped create. "My name is Dorothy Wilson," she began. 2 years ago, I was a cleaning lady who was fired for breaking a paperweight. Today, I'm the director of a program that has placed over 200 women in professional roles. Women who are now contributing to their companies, supporting their families, and building the kinds of lives they never thought possible. She spoke about her own journey, about the women she had worked with, about the resistance they had faced, and the victories they had achieved. She spoke about the legal challenge as what it really was, an attempt to preserve systems that benefited some people at the expense of others. "The opponents of this program claim that we're lowering standards," Dorothy said. "But we're not lowering standards. We're expanding definitions. We're proving that intelligence, creativity, and dedication come in forms that traditional hiring practices have overlooked. We're showing that the woman who's been managing a household on a minimum wage salary has skills that are valuable in a corporate environment. A reporter raised her hand. Miss Wilson, critics say that you're asking companies to hire people who aren't qualified for professional positions. How do you respond to that? Dorothy smiled. I respond by pointing to the results. The women who've gone through this program have consistently met or exceeded performance expectations in their positions. They've brought fresh perspectives, creative solutions, and a level of dedication that comes from knowing how rare these opportunities are. If that's not qualification, I don't know what is. Another reporter called out, "What's your response to the legal challenge from Henderson and Associates?" My response is that we welcome the opportunity to prove in a court of law what we've already proven in the workplace, that this program is based on merit, not charity. That the women who've been hired through this initiative earned their positions and deserve to keep them. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. Dorothy answered each one with the confidence that came from knowing her facts, believing in her cause, and understanding that she was fighting for something much larger than herself. As the press conference ended and the reporters began to leave, Brian joined Dorothy at the podium. "How do you think it went?" he asked. "I think we told our story honestly and completely. Now we wait to see if people believe us. I believe us, and I believe in us. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Dorothy looked out at the conference room, which was slowly emptying except for the program participants who had stayed to offer their support. Maria, Jennifer, Angela, Sandra, Lisa. All of them had risked their own careers by publicly supporting a program that was under legal attack. "Thank you," Dorothy said to them, "all of you, for being here, for standing with us, for proving every day that this program works." "We're not going anywhere," Maria replied. "This program changed our lives. We're going to make sure it keeps changing lives for other women." As Dorothy left the building that evening, she felt the same mixture of fear and determination that had carried her through every major challenge in her life. The legal battle ahead would be difficult, the public scrutiny would be intense, and the outcome was far from certain. But she also felt something else, the support of women who had become her partners in proving that dreams could come true, the respect of a man who had learned to see her as an equal, and the knowledge that she was fighting for something that mattered more than her own comfort or security. The program she had helped build was about more than job training or professional development. It was about the fundamental belief that every person deserved the opportunity to reach their potential, that talent existed in unexpected places, and that the courage to take risks on people could change everything. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, Dorothy Wilson went home knowing that she had found her purpose, her voice, and her place in a story that was far from over. The legal battle that followed consumed 3 months of Dorothy's life and tested every aspect of the program she had helped build. Henderson and Associates had filed formal complaints with multiple agencies, alleging that the Women's Professional Development Initiative violated federal employment laws by giving preferential treatment to unqualified candidates. The investigation was thorough and invasive. Government auditors reviewed every aspect of the program's operations, interviewed dozens of participants and supervisors, and scrutinized employment records going back to the program's inception. For weeks, Dorothy felt like she was living under a microscope, with every decision questioned and every success treated as potential evidence of misconduct. "The preliminary findings are mixed," Brian told Dorothy during one of their weekly strategy meetings. The investigators can't find any evidence of discrimination or fraud, but they're concerned about our selection criteria." "What kind of concerns?" "They're questioning whether we're being fair to applicants who have traditional qualifications but aren't selected for the program. They want us to implement a more standardized scoring system." Dorothy felt a familiar frustration rising in her chest. A standardized scoring system that would automatically favor people with college degrees and traditional work experience. That would defeat the entire purpose of the program. I know, but we might have to compromise if we want to keep the program running. Brian, if we compromise on the core principles of this program, it stops being worth fighting for. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Jennifer Chen entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something you both need to see." Jennifer opened the folder and pulled out a stack of newspaper clippings, magazine articles and printed emails. "The media response to our press conference has been incredible." Dorothy took the materials and began reading. The headlines were more supportive than she had dared to hope. Program proves merit exists in unexpected places. Corporate initiative challenges, traditional hiring, women's success stories speak for themselves. "This is amazing," Dorothy said, scanning an editorial from the Chicago Tribune that praised the program's innovative approach to talent development. "It gets better," Jennifer continued. We've received over 300 emails from women asking about the program. 22 companies have contacted us about implementing similar initiatives, and 3 major corporations have offered to fund legal expenses for fighting the Henderson Challenge." Brian looked up from the article he was reading. 3 major corporations: Apple, Microsoft, and Johnson & Johnson. They all issued statements saying that programs like ours represent the future of inclusive hiring. Dorothy felt tears coming to her eyes. People believe in what we're doing. "More than that," Jennifer said, "they're willing to fight for it." The tide of public opinion had shifted dramatically in their favor, but the legal challenge continued. Henderson and Associates, backed by several other companies that opposed the program, refused to withdraw their complaints despite the negative publicity they were receiving. The final hearing was held on a rainy Thursday morning in downtown Chicago. Dorothy sat in the federal courthouse beside Brian and their legal team, facing a panel of investigators who would determine the program's fate. "Ms. Wilson," the lead investigator said, "you've been described as both the architect of this program and its most vocal defender. In your opinion, what sets this initiative apart from other job training programs?" Dorothy stood, her heart racing but her voice steady. "What sets this program apart is that it recognizes potential before credentials. It sees talent before titles. It understands that the skills needed to manage a household on a minimum wage income are the same skills needed to succeed in a corporate environment: budgeting, problem-solving, multitasking, leadership. But critics argue that you're asking employers to lower their standards to accommodate unqualified applicants. I'm asking employers to expand their definitions of qualification. The woman who's been balancing 3 part-time jobs while raising children and caring for elderly parents has demonstrated time management, crisis management, and interpersonal skills that can't be taught in a classroom. Those are qualifications, not concessions." The investigator consulted his notes. "Henderson and Associates claims that your program creates an unfair advantage for certain applicants based on demographics rather than merit." Dorothy felt a surge of anger, but she kept her voice calm. "Henderson and Associates rejected me for employment because I had been fired from my previous position. They made no effort to understand the circumstances of that termination or to evaluate my actual qualifications. They demonstrated exactly the kind of bias that this program was created to address." Can you elaborate on that? Traditional hiring practices favor people who have had traditional opportunities. They reward people who've never had to overcome significant obstacles, who've never had their potential questioned, who've never had to prove themselves in the face of systemic disadvantages. This program levels the playing field by giving equal consideration to people whose potential has been overlooked. The questioning continued for 2 hours. Dorothy answered every inquiry with the confidence that came from knowing her facts and believing in her cause. She spoke about individual success stories, about measurable outcomes, about the tangible benefits that partner companies had experienced. When it was over, the investigators announced that they would issue their findings within 2 weeks. "How do you think it went?" Brian asked as they left the courthouse. "I think we told the truth. Now we wait to see if the truth is enough." The waiting was the hardest part. Dorothy tried to maintain her normal routine, continuing to work with program participants and plan for future initiatives, but the uncertainty cast a shadow over everything. If the program was shut down, hundreds of women would lose opportunities they had worked so hard to earn. If it was severely restricted, the impact would be limited to a fraction of what they had hoped to achieve. "Mom, you're pacing," Emma observed during one of their phone conversations. "That's never a good sign. I'm nervous. This program has become my life's work, and the thought that it might be taken away by people who don't understand its value is overwhelming. But you've built something that matters. Even if the government investigators don't understand it, the women who've been helped by the program understand it. The companies that have partnered with you understand it. The people who support you understand it. Sometimes that doesn't feel like enough. It's more than enough, Mom. You've proven that change is possible, that people can grow, that systems can be improved. No investigation can take that away." Emma was right, Dorothy realized. Regardless of the investigators' decision, the program had already succeeded in its most important goal, proving that talent existed everywhere, but opportunity didn't, and that people like Dorothy Wilson could create those opportunities if they were willing to fight for them. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Dorothy was in her office, reviewing applications for the next program cycle, when Brian knocked on her door. "The investigators called," he said. "They've issued their findings." Dorothy's heart stopped. And no violations, no evidence of discrimination or fraud. The program is cleared to continue operating without restrictions. Dorothy felt her knees give way. She sat down hard in her chair, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and the sudden realization that the fight was over. "They did recommend some procedural changes," Brian continued, "but nothing that affects the core mission or selection criteria. We won. Dorothy, we actually won." "What about Henderson and Associates?" "They've withdrawn their complaints. Apparently, the negative publicity was affecting their business relationships. Several clients cancelled contracts after the investigation started." Dorothy laughed, a sound that was part joy and part hysteria. "We won. We won. And more than that, we've proven that programs like this can survive legal challenges, that there's public support for inclusive hiring practices, that change is possible even when it's difficult." That evening, Dorothy called a meeting of all the program participants to share the news. The conference room was packed with women who had risked their careers by supporting the program during its darkest hour. "I have an announcement," Dorothy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The federal investigation is over. The program has been cleared of all charges. We can continue our work without restrictions." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Dorothy looked at the faces of women who had become her partners, her colleagues, her friends. They had fought this battle together, and they had won together. "This victory belongs to all of you," Dorothy continued. "Every woman who stood up for the program, who shared her story, who refused to be intimidated by people who wanted to preserve the status quo. You proved that we belong here, that we deserve these opportunities, that we have every right to build the kinds of lives we want." Maria raised her hand. What's next for the program? Next, we grow. We expand to more companies, more cities, more women who need these opportunities. We build on what we've learned, we improve what we've created, and we keep proving that talent exists everywhere. And what about you, Dorothy? Angela asked. What's next for you, personally? Dorothy paused, thinking about the question. 6 months ago, she would have said that her future was entirely tied to the program's success. But the legal battle had taught her something important about herself. She had become more than just the program's coordinator. She had become its voice, its advocate, its most visible representative. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, she said. Fighting for women who need opportunities, challenging systems that perpetuate inequality, proving that everyone deserves the chance to reach their potential. As the meeting ended and the women began to leave, Brian approached Dorothy. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, he said. Something personal. What is it? Over the past 2 years, working with you, fighting alongside you, building this program together, it's changed me in ways I never expected, not just professionally, but personally. Dorothy felt her heart rate quicken. Brian, I know this is complicated. I know our history makes this awkward, but I need you to know that somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Not just with your intelligence or your passion or your commitment to this work, but with you, with the person you are, the strength you've shown, the grace you've demonstrated even when I didn't deserve it. Dorothy stared at him, her mind racing. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know how I feel. Our working relationship is too important to risk. So if you don't feel the same way, we can pretend this conversation never happened. Dorothy thought about the past 2 years, the journey from termination to partnership, from anger to respect, from mistrust to friendship. She thought about the man who had once fired her for breaking a paperweight and the man who now stood before her, vulnerable and honest and completely different from the person she had first encountered. Brian, she said finally, I need time to think about this. Our relationship has been so focused on the program, on building something professional and meaningful. The idea of it becoming something personal is overwhelming. Terrifying, Dorothy admitted, but not unwelcome. Brian smiled. That's more than I hoped for. Take all the time you need. Whatever happens between us personally, our professional partnership will continue. The program is too important to let anything interfere with it. As Dorothy drove home that evening, she found herself thinking not about the legal victory or the program's future, but about the unexpected turn her relationship with Brian had taken. 2 years ago, she had seen him as everything that was wrong with the corporate world, cold, ruthless, indifferent to human suffering. Now she saw him as a partner, a friend, and possibly something more. The transformation hadn't been sudden or easy. It had required months of working together, challenging each other, learning to trust each other. It had required Brian to confront his own biases and limitations, and Dorothy to overcome her anger and resentment. But somewhere in that process, something deeper had developed, a connection based on shared values, mutual respect, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. For the first time since her divorce 8 years earlier, Dorothy allowed herself to consider the possibility of love. Not the desperate need for security that had driven her first marriage, but the mature recognition that she had found someone who saw her as an equal, who valued her contributions, who had proven himself worthy of her trust. The future was uncertain, as it always was. But for the first time in years, Dorothy felt like she was writing her own story, rather than simply surviving the plot that life had handed her. The program would continue to grow and change lives. The partnership with Brian would continue to evolve and deepen. And Dorothy Wilson, former cleaning lady and current advocate for women everywhere, would continue to prove that the most remarkable transformations began with the courage to believe that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, and that love could grow in the most unexpected places. 3 months after the legal victory, Dorothy stood in her bathroom mirror on a Saturday morning, trying to decide whether the navy blue dress or the burgundy one was more appropriate for the occasion. It had been years since she had been on what could properly be called a date, and the nervousness she felt was both familiar and strange. "Mom, you look beautiful in both of them," Emma called from the bedroom. But the burgundy brings out your eyes. "Are you sure this isn't too much?" Dorothy asked, smoothing the fabric over her hips. "It's just dinner." "It's not just dinner, and you know it. It's your first real date with Brian." Dorothy felt her cheeks warm. The past 3 months had been a careful dance of professional collaboration and personal discovery. She and Brian had continued their work partnership without missing a beat, but underneath their meetings and planning sessions was an undercurrent of possibility that made every interaction charged with new meaning. They had been spending more time together outside of work, coffee meetings that turned into long conversations, working dinners that became personal discussions about their hopes and fears. The transition from colleagues to something more had been gradual and natural, but tonight was their first official acknowledgement that their relationship had moved beyond the professional realm. "I'm nervous," Dorothy admitted. "Good nervous or bad nervous?" "Good nervous, I think. It's been so long since I've felt this way about someone, and the fact that it's Brian makes it even more complicated." Emma appeared in the doorway, her expression serious. "Mum, I know this situation is unusual, but I've watched you with Brian over the past 2 years. I've seen how he looks at you, how he listens to you, how much he respects your opinions. Whatever happened in the past, he's become a different person. I know. That's what makes this so scary. I'm falling for someone I once hated." "You're falling for someone who was capable of growth, who was willing to change, who proved that people can become better than they were. That's actually pretty amazing." Dorothy turned away from the mirror and hugged her daughter. "When did you become so wise about relationships?" "I learned from watching you. You taught me that forgiveness is possible, that people can change, that love is worth the risk even when it's complicated." An hour later, Dorothy sat across from Brian at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, the kind of intimate establishment that was perfect for conversations that required privacy and honesty. "You look beautiful," Brian said, his eyes reflecting the warmth she had learned to associate with the man he had become. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." They ordered wine and settled into the kind of easy conversation that had developed over months of working together, but tonight felt different, more personal, more vulnerable, more charged with the possibility of what they might become. "I have something to tell you," Brian said, after the waiter had taken their dinner order. "That sounds ominous." "It's not ominous, but it is important." Brian reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been offered a position with a consulting firm in Seattle. They want me to help other companies develop inclusion programs based on our model." Dorothy felt her heart sink. That's a wonderful opportunity for you." "It would be, except for one problem. I don't want to leave Chicago. I don't want to leave the program we've built together. And I don't want to leave you, Brian. I know it's presumptuous to assume that you'd want me to stay. We're just beginning to explore what this could be between us. But Dorothy, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Not just professionally, but personally." Dorothy studied his face, seeing the vulnerability he had learned to show her over the months of working together. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I turned down the offer." I'm saying that I want to stay here with you, building something that matters. I'm saying that I'm ready to take the risk of pursuing a relationship with the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Dorothy felt tears coming to her eyes. You turned down a major career opportunity. I chose a different kind of opportunity, the opportunity to build a life with someone I love. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Brian, I'm scared, Dorothy admitted. Our history is so complicated. The power dynamics, the way we met, the fact that you once treated me terribly. Sometimes I wonder if we can build something healthy on that foundation. I understand your concerns, but Dorothy, we've already built something healthy on that foundation. We've built trust, respect, partnership. We've proven that people can change, that relationships can evolve, that the worst beginning can lead to the best outcome. What if it doesn't work? What if we try this and it fails? We'd lose our working relationship, our friendship, everything we've created together. Brian squeezed her hand gently. What if it does work? What if we create something even more beautiful than what we already have? What if we prove that love can grow from the most unlikely circumstances? Dorothy looked into his eyes and saw the man who had learned to see her as an equal, who had supported her through the legal challenge, who had proven himself capable of genuine change and growth. The man who had once been her worst enemy had become her closest ally, and somewhere in that transformation, she had fallen in love with him. I love you too, she said quietly. Brian's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire appearance. Really? Really? I fought it for months, told myself it was impossible, that it was a betrayal of who I used to be, but I can't deny it anymore. I love the man you've become, Brian. I love the partner you've been, the friend you've proven yourself to be. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Where do we go from here? Slowly, Dorothy said. Carefully. With respect for what we've built professionally and excitement about what we might build personally. I can live with slowly and carefully. They spent the rest of dinner talking about their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future, their amazement at the journey that had brought them to this point. As they walked to Brian's car afterward, Dorothy felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. There's something else I want to discuss with you, Brian said as they drove through the city. Something about the program. What about it? I want to make it independent of Mitchell Enterprises. I want to establish it as its own non-profit organization, with you as the executive director and complete autonomy over its operations. Dorothy stared at him. Are you serious? Completely serious. The program has grown beyond what any single company can support. It needs its own identity, its own funding base, its own leadership structure, and it needs you at the helm, not as my employee, but as its leader. Brian, that's an incredible offer, but no buts. Dorothy, you built this program. You understand its mission better than anyone. You've proven that you can run it successfully, fight for it when necessary, and grow it into something that changes lives. It should be yours. Dorothy felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. What would that mean for us? Personally, I mean. It would mean that our personal relationship would be completely separate from our professional lives. It would eliminate any concerns about power dynamics or conflicts of interest. It would allow us to be equals in every sense of the word. As they pulled up in front of Dorothy's house, she realized that Brian had thought through every aspect of their situation, had anticipated every concern she might have about mixing their personal and professional lives. I need to think about this, she said, all of it. The non-profit idea, what it would mean for us, how we'd structure everything. Of course. Take all the time you need. Dorothy got out of the car but leaned down to speak to him through the open window. Brian, thank you for dinner, for the offer, for being patient with my fears, for becoming the kind of person I could fall in love with. Thank you for giving me the chance to become that person." As Brian drove away, Dorothy stood on her front porch, looking at the small yellow house that had been her refuge during the worst period of her life. In a few months, if she accepted Brian's offer, she would be running her own organization, making decisions that affected hundreds of women's lives, building something that could outlast both of them. The girl who had been fired for breaking a paperweight would become the woman who broke barriers, who challenged systems, who proved that potential existed everywhere but opportunity didn't, until someone with courage and vision decided to create it. Dorothy looked up at the stars barely visible through the city's lights and made a wish that her mother, who had taught her that dignity was a choice and that dreams were worth fighting for, could see what her daughter had become. Tomorrow, she would call Brian and accept his offer. She would take the leap into independence, into leadership, into a future she was writing for herself. She would prove, once and for all, that the most remarkable transformations began with the courage to believe that anything was possible. The grand opening of the Wilson Center for Women's Professional Development took place on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Dorothy's first date with Brian. The converted warehouse in Chicago's West Loop had been transformed into a state-of-the-art training facility, complete with computer labs, conference rooms, a resource library, and office space for the staff that had grown to include 12 full-time employees. Dorothy stood at the podium in the main hall, looking out at an audience of 300 people who had come to celebrate the center's launch. In the front row sat the original program participants, Maria, Jennifer, Angela, Sandra, and Lisa, all of whom had taken leadership roles in the organization. Behind them were the hundreds of women who had gone through the program over the past 3 years, many now serving as mentors for newer participants. 3 years ago, Dorothy began, I was a cleaning lady who lost her job for making a mistake. Today, I'm the executive director of an organization that has placed over 800 women in professional roles, women who are now contributing to their communities, supporting their families, and building the kinds of lives they never thought possible. The applause was warm and sustained. Dorothy looked at Brian, who was sitting in the third row with a smile that spoke of genuine pride and affection. Their relationship had deepened over the past year, moving from tentative exploration to committed partnership. He had proposed 3 months ago during a quiet dinner at the same restaurant where they had their first date, offering her a ring that belonged to his grandmother and a promise that they would build their future together as equals. The Wilson Center represents more than just a training facility, Dorothy continued. It represents a new way of thinking about talent, about potential, about the kinds of opportunities we create for people who have been overlooked by traditional systems. She spoke about the center's programs, not just job training, but financial literacy courses, leadership development workshops, mentorship programs that connected women with successful professionals in their fields of interest. She spoke about the partnerships with over 50 companies that had committed to inclusive hiring practices and the scholarship fund that would help program participants continue their education. But mostly, she spoke about the women themselves, their courage, their determination, their willingness to take risks on themselves even when no one else would. The women who come through our doors don't need charity, Dorothy said. They need opportunity. They need someone to recognize their potential, to invest in their success, to believe that they deserve the same chances that other people take for granted. After the ceremony, Dorothy mingled with guests in the center's main hall, accepting congratulations and discussing the future of the organization. The response had been overwhelming. Applications for the next program cycle, requests for partnerships from companies across the Midwest, inquiries from other cities about replicating the model. You did it, Brian said, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of champagne. You built something that's going to outlast all of us. We did it, Dorothy corrected. None of this would have been possible without your support, your willingness to take risks, your commitment to changing how business is done. I was just the catalyst. You were the architect, the builder, the vision behind everything that matters. Dorothy looked around the hall at the faces of women who had become her colleagues, her friends, her partners, in proving that dreams could come true if you were willing to work for them. There's something I want to tell you, she said to Brian, something I've been thinking about since we got engaged. What is it? I forgive you, completely and permanently, for firing me, for the way you treated me, for all of it. But more than that, I'm grateful for it. Brian looked surprised. Grateful? If you hadn't fired me, I never would have discovered what I was capable of. I never would have found my purpose, my voice, my power. I never would have learned that I could build something meaningful, something that changes lives. And I never would have learned what really matters, Brian replied. I never would have become the kind of person who deserves someone like you. They were interrupted by Emma, who was now in her senior year of college and working part-time at the center while completing her degree in social work. Mom, the reporter from the Tribune wants to interview you about the expansion plans. In a minute, honey, Dorothy turned back to Brian. Oh, Dee, are you ready for this? Marriage, running the center together, building a life that's completely different from anything either of us imagined 3 years ago. I'm ready for anything as long as I'm doing it with you. Dorothy looked at her engagement ring, a simple but elegant piece that represented not just their commitment to each other, but their commitment to building something that would outlast their individual lives. The ceremony that afternoon was small and intimate, held in the garden behind Dorothy's house with only their closest friends and family in attendance. Emma served as maid of honor, and Maria Santos gave a reading about the possibility of new beginnings. The judge who performed the ceremony was a woman who had gone through the program 2 years earlier and was now working as a legal advocate for low-income families. To you, Dorothy Wilson, take Brian Mitchell to be your husband, to love and honor and cherish, in good times and in challenges, for as long as you both shall live. Dorothy looked into Brian's eyes and saw the man who had learned to see her as an equal, who had supported her dreams even when they required him to step back and let her lead, who had proven that people could change in fundamental ways if they were willing to do the work. I do, she said, her voice clear and certain. Do you, Brian Mitchell, take Dorothy Wilson to be your wife, to love and honor and cherish in good times and in challenges, for as long as you both shall live? Brian's voice was steady as he replied, I do. And I promise to spend every day of our marriage proving that I'm worthy of the woman who taught me what it means to be human. As they kissed to seal their vows, Dorothy felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with finding a husband and everything to do with finding herself. The woman who had once cleaned offices in silence had found her voice. The woman who had once been treated as disposable had proven her value. The woman who had once been fired for a mistake had built an organization that created opportunities for hundreds of other women. The reception was held in the center's main hall, surrounded by the photos and testimonials that documented 3 years of changed lives. Dorothy danced with her new husband, celebrated with the women who had become her partners, and marveled at the journey that had brought her from termination to triumph. What are you thinking about? Brian asked as they swayed to the music. I'm thinking about the letter I wrote to you 3 years ago. I told you that I hoped you would find your way back to whatever made you human. You did more than hope for it. You showed me the way. And you showed me something I never expected to find. What's that? That the worst things that happen to us can become the foundations for the best things. That forgiveness can lead to love. That two people who start as enemies can become partners in building something beautiful. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Dorothy stood with Brian in the center they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of what was possible when people were willing to take risks on each other. The Wilson Center would continue to grow, creating opportunities for women who had been overlooked by traditional systems. The model would be replicated in other cities, other states, proving that inclusive hiring practices were not just morally right, but economically smart. The women who had gone through the program would become leaders, mentors, advocates for the next generation of women who needed chances they had never been given. But more than any of that, Dorothy and Brian had proven that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, that love could grow from the most unlikely circumstances. They had shown that the courage to see potential in unexpected places could transform not just individual lives, but entire systems. As they turned off the lights and locked the center for the night, Dorothy thought about the paperweight that had started it all, the small mistake that had led to the greatest opportunity of her life. She had kept Brian's replacement paperweight on her desk as a reminder that sometimes the things that break us open become the places where the light gets in. Tomorrow, they would begin their married life together, continuing the work they had started as adversaries and perfected as partners. They would prove every day that the most remarkable transformations began with the willingness to believe that people could become better than they were, that dreams could come true, and that love was always worth the risk. The woman who had once been invisible had become a leader. The man who had once been heartless had learned to love. And together, they had built something that would change lives for generations. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.